Have you ever been made welcome somewhere and known, before your coat was even off, that the welcome was a thing being done to you and not for you? Not rudeness. Nothing you could point at. A man holds the door and takes your bag, and says the right words in the right order, and something underneath all of it is counting you, your weight, your money, your horse, how many people know where you are tonight. If you have felt that, then you already understand the kind of place I am going to tell you about, and you already understand why a traveler might sit down at a stranger's table and eat a good hot supper, and sleep in a clean bed, and never come out of the hollow he rode into. There is a stretch of old road in southeastern Kentucky that men used to call the Coldwater Fork of the Rockcastle Trace. Between the years 1871 and 1883, at least 19 people are known to have gone into that hollow and not come out the other side. 19 is the number the county could prove. The number the county could not prove is higher. And I will get to why, and I will get to the 17 hats, and I will get to the third stall of that barn, because the third stall is the whole of it, and I am going to make you wait for it. But first, a note, and then I will not interrupt again for a long while. If this is the kind of case you would want 10 of, and not one told slow, told full, in a voice made for the small hours there is a collection. What the Hollows Keep. 10 files out of 10 counties across 4 states, 1849 to 1952. Every one of them a place that looked like ordinary ground. Every one of them signed off by somebody official with the wrong word written in the wrong box. 9 hours of it, front to back, to sit with in the dark. The link is in the description below and pinned at the top of the comments. And before I go on, tell me where you are watching this from. Put it in the comments. I want to see how far this one reaches tonight. And if you have not already, hit subscribe. It is free. And it means the next one finds you. Now then, the man was Thomas Ellery Vance, and in the autumn of 1883 he was 34 years old. He was a livestock buyer out of Bourbon County, Kentucky, which in those days was a real trade and a hard one. 4 times a year he rode a circuit south and east out of the bluegrass, down into the counties where the ground gets up on its hind legs, and he bought mules and beef cattle from men who had no other way to sell them. He carried cash to do it. That is the part to hold on to. A cattle buyer in 1883 carried his money on his body in a canvas belt under his shirt, because there was no bank between where he started and where he was going, and everyone on that road knew it, and everyone on that road knew it about every man like him. He was not a big man, 5'9", maybe 160 pounds, with a buyer's habit of standing slightly sideways to whoever he was talking to, which his own father had told him made him look like he was about to leave. He had a flat, unhurried way of speaking. He was good at his work because he did not want anything visibly, and men will give a better price to a man who does not seem to want. He had been married. Her name was Cordelia. Nobody but her mother ever called her that. To everyone else she was Delia, and to Delia, Thomas Ellery Vance was never Tom. She called him Ellery, from the first week she knew him to the last hour of her life, because she said Tom was a name for a man who owned a wagon and nothing else. She had been the daughter of a Fayette County harness maker. She was not a beautiful woman, and she knew it, and she had made a kind of ongoing joke out of it that he never got tired of. She hummed constantly, and she hummed badly off the note, and never the same amount off, so that a tune she had hummed 100 times was a slightly different wrong tune every time. She snapped beans on the porch with a pan in her lap and her feet on the bottom step. She had a habit of tapping her thumbnail against the rim of a cup twice before she drank out of it, every time, and when he asked her once why she did that, she said she did not know she did it, and then she did it again while she was denying it, and they both laughed so hard the dog got up and left. She laughed at her own stories before she got to the end of them. That was the thing about her. She would be 3 sentences from the joke, and she would already be gone, laughing, with her hand flat on the table, and he would have to wait to hear how it came out. It made her a terrible teller of stories, and it made her the best company he ever had. She died in the 2nd week of October, 1879, of typhoid, at 28 years old, in 11 days, in a bedroom in Paris, Kentucky, with the window open, because she asked for it open. They had been married 5 years and had no children. The doctor came twice and did nothing the second time but write down the hour. Ellery Vance did not fall apart in any way a neighbor could have pointed to. He went back on his circuit in November. He bought 41 head that season and paid a fair price for all of them. He kept her cup on the shelf and did not use it, and did not put it away either, and that is more or less the whole shape of his grief for 4 years. He did not use it, and he did not put it away. I want you to hold on to 3 things about Delia Vance, because in about an hour and a half they are going to matter more than anything else in this story. She hummed off key, and never the same amount off. She tapped her thumbnail twice against a cup before drinking, and she called him Ellery. Never Tom. Not once in 5 years. Hold those. We will come back for them. In late September of 1883, Ellery Vance rode south out of Bourbon County on a circuit that was supposed to take him 5 weeks. He had a good mare, a brown-grade mare he called Peach, and a mule carrying his kit, and $410 in a belt under his shirt, which was a very large amount of money in 1883. Call it something like $13,000 in the money you carry now. He came down through Rockcastle County and bought nothing there worth having. He crossed into Laurel County and bought 9 head of cattle from 3 different men, and made arrangements for the drovers to bring them north behind him, which was the ordinary way of it. And on the 11th of October, 1883, he came into a settlement called Beaver Ford in Tallow County, Kentucky, which was the last real settlement on the road before the Coldwater Fork. Beaver Ford in 1883 was a store, a mill, a Baptist church, a smith, and 11 houses. The store belonged to a woman named Verna Blount, who was 56 years old and had buried 2 husbands and run the store through both of them and after. Verna Blount was a small woman with a wide, plain, weathered face and a way of looking at a stranger's boots before she looked at his face, because she said the boots would tell her how far he had come and the face would only tell her what he wanted her to know. Ellery Vance bought from her coffee, a pound of salt, hard crackers, a tin of lard, a wool blanket to replace one he had torn, and a box of cartridges for the pistol he did not much like carrying. He paid her, and she counted his change out slow, and then she asked him where he was riding. He said he was going on toward Manchester, and would take the Coldwater Fork, and Verna Blount stopped, with her hand still on the coins. She said, "Not tonight you are not. It is 4 in the afternoon." He said the light would hold another 2 hours, and he had ridden worse roads in worse light. She said, "It is not the light." Now, I want to be exact here, because Ellery Vance was exact about it for the rest of his life, and told it the same way to 4 different people over 51 years, and the 4 accounts do not disagree on a single word of what Verna Blount said next. She came around the end of the counter. She was a foot shorter than him. She said, "I am going to tell you 3 things, and then I am not going to speak of it again, because I have to live here after you ride out, and because I have said it before to men who laughed at me, and I have had to think about those men for a long time after. 1. Do not lodge at the stand on the Coldwater Fork. There is a house there that takes travelers. It is the only house on 11 miles of that road, and it will look like the answer to your evening. It is not. 2. If you do lodge there, and men do, and I know they do not let anyone put your horse up for you. Do it yourself. Walk it in yourself, and walk it out yourself. and do not let any man of that family carry your lamp into that barn ahead of you. 3. If a night comes on that road when you cannot keep hold of your own mind, go up the fork, not down it. At the head of the hollow there is an old woman named Ottie Redwine. Her door will open. Walk to it. Do not run to it. There is a difference, and it matters. Ellery Vance was a polite man, and he did not laugh. But she saw whatever crossed his face, and she went back around the counter. He said, "Who is at the stand?" She said, "The Sizemores." And then she said, "That is the fourth thing," and I said 3. He asked what she meant by that, and she wrapped his crackers in paper and did not answer. And when he was going out the door with his goods under his arm, she said one more thing to his back. She said, "There is no bad in that family you could see coming. That is what I am telling you. If there was bad in them you could see, nobody would have gone." That is the last thing Verna Blount said to Thomas Ellery Vance. He rode out of Beaver Ford at 20 minutes past 4 in the afternoon on the 11th of October, 1883, with a good 2 hours of light on a road that dropped steadily southeast into a hollow between 2 long ridges. And I will tell you now, because you should know it going in. 11 other men bought goods from Verna Blount's store and rode down that same road in the 12 years before he did and got the same 3 warnings. And of those 11, 7 were never accounted for. She kept a ledger. That is how we know she wrote their names down when they bought their goods, because that is what a storekeeper does, and later, much later, when it mattered, somebody thought to read the ledger against the list of men whose families had written to the county asking after them. 7 names sat in both columns. Verna Blount had sold crackers and coffee to 7 ghosts and warned every one of them and watched every one of them ride out anyway. I will come back to that ledger. The Coldwater Fork ran about 11.5 miles between Beaver Ford and the place where it climbed out again toward the Manchester Road. It followed a creek the whole way, crossing it 4 times at fords, and the ridges on either side came in close enough in places that a man on horseback lost the sun a full hour before sunset. Ellery Vance rode it slow. The road was in fair repair, better than he expected, which he noticed and thought nothing of at the time. Somebody was keeping the fords clear. Somebody had cut back the brush along the road within the last year, and had cut it back well past where you would bother if you only wanted to get a wagon through. The timber on both sides was old, big oak, big poplar, hemlock down along the creek. It was the 2nd week of October, and the color was coming on hard. He remembered it as one of the prettiest pieces of country he had ever ridden through, and he said that plainly and without irony, decades afterward, to a man who asked him to describe it. He said, "It was beautiful. I want that put down. It was as pretty a hollow as I ever saw in my life. That is part of what I am telling you. The first thing that was not right he did not notice for close to an hour, and when he noticed it he could not immediately say what he had noticed. He was riding along, and he became aware that he had been uneasy for some time and did not know why. So he did what a man who has spent 15 years in the woods does. He stopped and sat still, and let his ears catch up with him. There were no birds. It was mid-October in Kentucky, in old timber, an hour before sunset. There should have been crows. There should have been jays fighting over the beechnuts. There should have been the small racket of 100 ordinary things settling toward dark. There was the creek. There was wind in the tops. There was his mare's feet and the mule's feet. There was nothing else. And there had been nothing else for some time. He sat there in the road for the better part of 2 minutes, and then a crow called somewhere up on the left-hand ridge, and another answered it, and the woods came back on like a lamp being turned up, and he felt foolish, and he rode on. But he was a man who paid attention for a living, and he noticed that the crow had called from a long way off up on the ridge, and that it did not come any closer, and that whatever else was in the hollow with him below the level of that ridge was still not making any sound at all. The sun went off the road at about 5:45. He had misjudged the light by a little, the way you do in a hollow, and he was now looking at either riding 2 dark hours to get out the far side, or making a cold camp in country he did not know, or taking the lodging he had been warned against. And this is where I want to be fair to him, because it is easy, from 140 years away, to say a man should have known. He had been told a story by a storekeeper. That is all he had. He was a professional traveler. He had been told stories by storekeepers in 6 counties for 15 years, about roads that were haunted, about fords that took a horse a year, about families you did not stay with. Every hollow in Kentucky had a house you did not stay at, every one of them. It was the ordinary furniture of the country. A man who took every one of those warnings seriously would have slept in the rain 300 nights a year. So when he came around a bend at 10 minutes to 6 and saw a light, he was glad to see it, and he was not ashamed of being glad. The Sizemore stand sat on the north side of the road, on a shelf of flat ground where the hollow widened out, maybe 40 acres of bottom, with the creek running along the far edge of it. There was a 2-story frame house, unpainted, with a stone chimney at each end and a covered porch running the whole front. There was a spring house. There was a corn crib. There was a good-sized garden put to bed for the winter. There were apple trees, 11 of them, in 2 rows. And behind the house, set back maybe 80 yards, there was a barn. I am going to describe that barn now, once, plainly, and then I am going to leave it alone for a while, and I want you to notice that I am leaving it alone. It was a big barn for that country. Frame, not log, which meant somebody had hauled sawn lumber 11.5 miles up a creek road to build it, or had run a mill on site. It was oriented with the long axis north and south. It had a wide central runway with stalls on both sides, a loft above, and a shed addition on the east. It was in excellent repair. The roof was sound, the siding was tight, the doors hung true. It had no windows. A barn of that size and period, in that country, would ordinarily have had at minimum a few small openings for light and air, a hay door in the gable, some gaps, something, and the loft did have a hay door in the north gable. But the walls of the lower floor, on all 4 sides, were tight board, floor to loft, with no opening except the 2 big doors at the north and south ends of the runway. Ellery Vance noticed this on his first evening from a distance of 80 yards in failing light and thought, that is a well-built barn, and somebody did not want a draft in it. He would think about that sentence for the rest of his life. A man came off the porch to meet him before he was fully into the yard. This was Absalom Sizemore, and he was, by every account anyone ever gave, an extremely likable man. He was somewhere in his 50s, big through the chest, gone a little soft in the middle, with a full gray-brown beard and a laugh that came easy and often. He wore a clean shirt. His hands were a working man's hands. He came out into the yard with his palms open and up in front of him, which is a gesture I want you to notice, because it is the gesture of a man showing you he is not carrying anything, and it is a gesture that no honest man in 1883 would have thought to make. Because no honest man in 1883 was thinking about whether he looked dangerous. He said, "Well, there is a fellow who has run out of daylight." Ellery Vance said, "That was about the size of it." Absalom Sizemore said the stand had been taking travelers on that road for 31 years. Bed, supper, breakfast, and the animals fed and watered for 75 cents, and he would go to 50 if a man was willing to eat what was already cooked rather than what he might prefer. Ellery Vance paid the 75 cents. I want to say something about that price. 75 cents in 1883 was a fair price. Not cheap, not a bargain. A bargain would have made him suspicious. Verna Blount had told him there would be nothing he could see coming, and here is the first proof of it. The Sizemores charged the correct amount of money. Somebody in that family had thought about that. Somebody in that family had worked out that a trap which looks like a bargain gets talked about, and a trap which charges full price does not. 31 years. Hold that number too. Now, the family. There were 3 brothers at the stand in the autumn of 1883. Absalom was the eldest, in his 50s, and he did the talking. Ephraim was somewhere in his 40s, and did not come in the house. Wade was the youngest, and he was 22 years old. Ellery Vance met Absalom in the yard and Wade in the kitchen, and did not meet Ephraim at all that first night, though he saw him twice, once crossing the yard toward the barn with a lantern, and once standing at the edge of the apple trees for what Vance guessed was 10 minutes, doing nothing that he could see. There was also a woman in the house. She was introduced to him as Rilla, with no last name given and none offered when he asked, which he did politely once. She was maybe 30. She cooked, and she was very good at it. And she did not sit down at the table, and she did not look at him directly one time in the whole of that first evening, except once, for about a second and a half, when Absalom Sizemore had gone out to the porch and Wade was at the wood box with his back turned. She looked at him for a second and a half. And then she went back to the stove. Remember Rilla. I am going to make you wait a long time for Rilla. And there was an old woman upstairs. Ellery Vance never saw her that first night, and never learned her name, and only knew she was there because he heard the floor above the kitchen take weight, twice, in a slow, shuffling rhythm, and because there was a 4th plate made up and carried up the stairs by Rilla and brought back down 40 minutes later with the food gone off it. Supper was pork, cornbread, dried apples stewed with sugar, beans, and coffee. Ellery Vance, who had been eating out of a saddlebag for 6 days, said it was the best meal he had eaten since he left home. And, I believe him, I want to be plain about that. The food at the Sizemore stand was, by every surviving account, genuinely good. That is not a small detail. That is a strategy. Absalom talked through supper, and was excellent company. He asked about the cattle trade, and knew enough about it to ask real questions. He talked about a mule he had owned in the 60s that he claimed could open a gate latch with its lip. And he told the story well, and Vance laughed at it. He asked Vance where he was from, and Vance told him. He asked how far behind him his drovers were with the 9 head, and Vance said they were 4 days back at least, and would take the low road with the stock, not the fork. And I want you to sit with that exchange for a second. How far behind you are your men? It is the most natural question in the world. It is exactly what a man in the lodging business would ask, because it tells him whether to expect 4 more suppers on Tuesday. Absalom Sizemore asked it in the middle of a funny story about a mule, and Vance answered it without a flicker. And the answer was, 4 days at least, and they are not coming this way. The answer was, nobody will be looking for me here. At some point in the evening, Absalom asked whether Vance was married, and Vance said he had been, and that she had died 4 years back, and Absalom said the right things and did not press. Wade Sizemore was in the room for that. 22 years old, sitting on a stool by the wood box with his hands hanging between his knees. Ellery Vance would remember, decades later, that when he said the words, "She died 4 years back," the youngest brother got up and went out the kitchen door into the dark without a word to anybody, and did not come back in while Vance was still awake. Absalom did not comment on it. Rilla did not look up, but Vance had been at a lot of tables in a lot of houses, and he knew what it looks like when a family has decided not to notice something. And he thought, and this is his phrase, from a letter written 30 years later, he thought that Wade Sizemore had gone out that door the way a boy leaves a room where his father is about to whip a dog. Now, the horse. Ellery Vance had been given 3 warnings in a store in Beaver Ford 5 hours earlier, and by 9 o'clock that night he had ignored the first one completely because he was sitting in the house he had been told not to lodge in, full of the best supper he had had in a week, listening to a funny story about a mule. But he remembered the second one. And he could not have told you why he remembered it, except that it was oddly specific, and specific things stick. Do not let any man of that family carry your lamp into that barn ahead of you. When he had first ridden in, Absalom had come off the porch with his hands up and said, "Wade will put your animals up." And Ellery Vance had said, without thinking about it much, "I will do it. She is particular." Peach was not particular. Peach was as easy a mare as he ever owned. It was a lie, and it came out of his mouth smooth, and he did not know he was going to say it until it was said. Absalom Sizemore said, "Suit yourself," and it went by, and nothing came of it, and they talked about something else. So at a little past 9, with the supper done, Ellery Vance took a lantern out of the kitchen and walked 80 yards across the yard in the dark to put his own animals up, and Wade Sizemore walked with him, not ahead of him, beside him, and carrying nothing. They walked out of the light of the house. The yard between the house and the barn was open ground, mowed, no obstruction. The night was clear and cold. It had come off cold hard once the sun went. The way it does in October in a hollow, and the sky over the yard had every star in it. Wade did not say anything on the walkout. Vance, who was a sociable man when he had eaten, tried him twice and got nothing. They came up on the barn. The big north door stood open, about 4 feet, and there was lantern light inside it, moving. Ephraim was in there. Wade Sizemore stopped, 10 feet short of the door, and put his hand out and took hold of Ellery Vance's sleeve. Vance stopped, and Wade Sizemore said, quietly, quickly, in a voice that Vance described as the voice of a man saying something he has said before and been hit for, he said, "Put your mare in the first stall on the left, not the second, not the third. First on the left, and stand where you can see the door while you do it, and come straight back out." And then he let go of the sleeve and walked into the barn ahead of him and said, in a completely normal voice, "Eph, we got a man's horse." Now, I want to lay out what Ellery Vance actually saw in that barn on the night of the 11th of October, 1883, because he was in there for less than 4 minutes, and it is one of the most important 4 minutes in this story. The runway ran the length of the barn, north to south, dirt floor, packed hard and swept. Swept. He noticed that. A barn floor that has been swept with a broom. There were 4 stalls on the left, 4 on the right, and a shed door in the east wall leading to the addition. 2 stalls on the right held horses the Sizemore's own stock, a plow team. The rest stood empty and clean. The first stall on the left was clean, bedded with fresh straw, and had a full manger and a bucket of water already drawn. It had been made ready for a horse before he arrived, which is exactly what a lodging house would do at dusk on a fall evening, and which also means somebody had expected a traveler. The second stall on the left was empty and bare. The third stall on the left had its door shut and barred on the outside with a squared timber laid into 2 iron brackets. Ellery Vance, standing in the runway with his own lantern in his hand and his mare's rein in the other, looked at that barred stall door for probably 3 seconds. And Ephraim Sizemore, who had not spoken to him and did not speak to him now, moved between him and it. Not fast, not obviously. He walked from where he was standing to a place on the other side of the runway, and the walk took him across Vance's line of sight, and when it was done he was standing between Ellery Vance and the third stall, holding a lantern, doing nothing at all. Ellery Vance put his mare in the first stall on the left. He unsaddled her and rubbed her down with a twist of straw and checked her feet. And it took him about 3 minutes, and he stood where he could see the north door the whole time, which he did not consciously decide to do. Here is what he noticed in those 3 minutes. The first thing, his mare would not put her head down to the manger. Peach was a greedy horse. Peach ate like it was a job. He put her in a stall with a full manger of good hay and clean water, and she stood with her head up and her ears forward, and her weight shifted back off her front feet, and she did not eat, and every few seconds she turned her head to the south, not toward the door he had come in by, and not toward the barred stall, but toward the south end of the runway. The second thing, the barn had a smell, and the smell was wrong, and he could not place it. Not carrion, he knew carrion. Not manure, not old hay, not mildew. He described it in later years 2 different ways to 2 different people, and I will give you both, because neither one is quite enough on its own. To his brother-in-law, in 1891, he said it smelled like the inside of a well. To a young Presbyterian minister named Coyle, in 1928, he said it smelled like a cellar under a cellar, and like cold coins. The third thing, and this is the one that put the hair up on his arms while he was standing there, the barn was warm. It was 38 degrees in the yard. A barn with 8 stalls, 2 horses, and no windows will hold a few degrees over the outside air. That is ordinary. That is animals and hay. The runway of that barn was warm the way a room with a stove in it is warm, and there was no stove, there was no fire. There could not have been a fire in a frame barn full of hay, and there was no smell of smoke, and no lamp but the 2 lanterns, and the warmth was not even. He walked from his mare's stall toward the north door, and the air got colder, ordinary October cold, and he stopped and stepped back 2 paces toward the south end of the runway, and it got warm again. He did it twice. He said it was like walking toward and away from a hearth in a dark room, except the hearth was somewhere down at the south end of a barn where there was nothing but a shut door and 3 empty stalls. He came out of the barn. Ephraim Sizemore came out behind him and pulled the north door to and dropped a bar across it on the outside. Ellery Vance said, "You bar it?" Ephraim Sizemore looked at him. He was a lean man with a long jaw, and the account says he had the flat, unbothered eyes of a man who has been doing something so long that he has stopped noticing it is unusual. He said, "Dogs get in." That was the only sentence Ephraim Sizemore ever said to Thomas Ellery Vance. They walked back to the house, 80 yards, across the open mowed yard, and Ellery Vance was aware, and this is where a modern man's skin ought to start crawling, that he had just watched a man bar a barn door from the outside, and that his own horse was on the inside of it, and that if there was ever a reason to go get his horse in a hurry in the night, he would be doing it in the dark, in a yard, with a door somebody else had barred. He did not say that out loud. He was a guest. He had paid 75 cents. Halfway across the yard, Wade Sizemore said, in that same low, fast voice, without turning his head, "You have a pistol?" Vance said he did. Wade said, "Keep it under the pillow, not in the bag." And then they were in the light of the house, and Absalom was on the porch with his pipe saying something cheerful about the frost, and Wade Sizemore's face changed on the way up the steps the way a curtain changes when you drop it, and he laughed at his brother's joke. Vance slept in the east room upstairs. Rope bed, straw tick, a chair, a washstand, a small square window facing east at the ridge. The door had a latch but no bar and no lock. He noticed that. He put the chair under the latch, which does very little, and which is the sort of thing men do to sleep rather than to be safe. He put the pistol under the pillow. He did not sleep well, and he did not sleep badly. He slept the shallow, listening sleep of a man in a strange house. And he woke maybe 5 or 6 times, and every time he woke the house was quiet, and every time he went back down. At some point in the small hours he thought around 2, but he had not wound his watch and could not swear to it. He came awake all the way at once, the way you do when a sound stops rather than when a sound starts. The house was silent. And he lay there and worked out what he was missing, and what he was missing was the creek. He had gone to sleep with the sound of the creek coming in around the window frame. It had been there all evening. It was 50 yards from the house, and it ran over rock. It was not there. He lay in the dark, in a strange house in a hollow in Tallow County, Kentucky, and listened to a creek, not running for what he estimated was somewhere between 2 and 4 minutes. And then it came back. Not gradually. It came back the way a sound comes back when you take your hands off your ears. He got up and went to the window and looked out at the yard. The yard was empty. The moon was down or behind the ridge. He could see the shape of the barn as a black mass against black. He could see the apple trees. Nothing moved. He stood at that window a long time, and then, while he was standing there, something in the barn began to make a sound, not loud, muffled by 80 yards and by tight board walls, a low, rhythmic, repeating sound on a cycle of maybe 3 seconds, over and over. His first thought, and he held on to it hard, was that it was one of the horses. A horse will paw or rub or kick a wall in its sleep. He listened to it for a while. It was not a horse, and the reason he knew it was not a horse is a detail that he would not tell anybody for 40 years, and which I am going to give you now, and then I am going to move on to the second day and let you carry it. It was not a horse, because after about a minute of it, another one started, out of rhythm with the first, at the other end of the barn, and then a third, and then all 3 of them fell into the same rhythm at the same instant, like men picking up a hammer stroke, and then they stopped together, and did not start again, and Ellery Vance stood at that window until the sky went gray over the east ridge. The morning of the 12th of October, 1883, was clear and cold with a heavy frost, and the Sizemore stand in the daylight was one of the pleasantest places Ellery Vance had ever woken up. I need you to understand this, because if you do not understand this, you will not understand the next 10 days, and you will spend the next 10 days shouting at a dead man to get on his horse. There was frost silvering the whole bottom. There was smoke coming up straight out of both chimneys. There were guineas in the yard. He had not seen the guineas the night before, making that ridiculous racket guineas make. Rilla was carrying water from the spring house. Absalom Sizemore was sitting on the porch, mending a hamestrap, and he called out, "Good morning," across the yard, like a man in a lithograph. Breakfast was eggs and side meat and biscuits with sorghum and coffee, and it was good. And at breakfast, Absalom Sizemore made him an offer. He said that the drovers coming behind with the 9 head would take 4 days at least, and probably 5, and that Vance had said himself he had 2 more buys to make in this end of the county before he turned north. He said the ordinary thing for a buyer to do was to ride out and back to Beaver Ford every day, 12 miles each way, and that was 24 miles of daylight thrown in a ditch. He said there was a bed here, and a barn, and a woman who could cook, and if Vance wanted to make the stand his base for the week, they would do it at 40 cents a day rather than 75, all found. And he said, and this is the line, he said, "And I will tell you where the stock is. I know every man on 11 miles of this creek, and most of them owe me a favor. You will not find it out on your own in a week. I could tell you in an hour." It was a good offer. It was a genuinely good offer. And here is the terrible thing about it, the thing that makes my skin move. It was true. Every part of that offer was true and was honored. Over the following days, Absalom Sizemore told Ellery Vance where to find stock, and the stock was there, and it was good stock, and Vance bought 11 head off 3 families up that hollow at fair prices, and was well treated by every one of them, and it was one of the best buying weeks of his career. The Sizemores did not cheat him out of a nickel. Verna Blount had said, "There is no bad in that family you could see coming." He took the offer. Of course he took the offer. You would have taken the offer. I would have taken the offer. He was a professional. He was being handed a professional advantage. And he had spent one uneasy night in a strange house and heard a creek go quiet, which is the sort of thing that sounds like nothing at all at 7 in the morning with a biscuit in your hand. He stayed at the Sizemore stand from the 11th of October to the 21st of October, 1883, 10 nights. 19 people are known to have gone into that hollow between 1871 and 1883 and not come out. Thomas Ellery Vance slept 10 nights in the house and came out. He is the only one we have. Everything anyone knows about the Coldwater Fork comes down through one man. And the reason it comes down through one man is a thing he did on the 6th night, and I will get there. Now, let me take you through the small wrongness. Because it was not a haunting at first. It was a series of things that were slightly the wrong size. The first was the apple trees. On the second day, in the middle of the afternoon, Vance came back from a bye up the hollow and put Peach in the first stall on the left himself, and came out and cut across the yard past the apple trees. 11 trees, 2 rows. 6 in the back row, 5 in the front. He stopped, because something had gone through him, and he stood there and looked at them and could not say what was wrong. And then he had it. There were 11 trees in 2 rows, and every one of them was the same size. Not similar. The same height, same spread, same trunk diameter, same age. 11 apple trees standing in an old orchard where 2 of them should have been dead, where 1 should have been split by lightning, where the one on the north end should have been stunted from the shade of the ridge, and the 2 on the south end should have been running away with themselves in the open ground. He was a man who bought living things for a living. He knew what a group of the same living thing looks like when it has been out in the weather for 30 years. It does not look like that. 11 mules, born the same day and raised in the same lot, do not look like that at 30 years old. He walked down the rows and looked at them. And the closer he got, the more ordinary each individual tree became: bark, moss, a broken limb here, an old pruning scar there. Each one was a perfectly ordinary apple tree. It was only in the aggregate, only at 40 feet, that it was wrong. He counted the fruit still on the north end tree because he wanted a number to hold on to. There were, he said, 31 apples on it. He did not count the others. He told the minister Coyle in 1928 that he did not count the others because he was afraid there would be 31 on every one of them, and that this thought had come to him standing in the sunshine at 2 in the afternoon on an ordinary Friday, and had frightened him worse than anything that had happened at night up to that point. The second thing was the road. He noticed on the 3rd day, riding out, that the brush along the Coldwater Fork Road had been cut back, which he had noticed on the way in, and that it had been cut back to a uniform distance from the roadbed on both sides. The whole 11.5 miles. That is a colossal amount of labor. That is 3 men working for months in a county that had no reason to do it, on a road that carried maybe 40 travelers a year. He asked Absalom about it that evening, easily, over supper, the way you ask about anything. Absalom said the county paid a little for road work, and they took it on, because money was money. Ellery Vance said that was a good deal of work for a little money. And Absalom Sizemore said, "Well, we like to see what is coming." And he laughed, and Vance laughed, and it was a joke, and it was funny, and it was also the plainest sentence anybody said to Thomas Ellery Vance in 10 days at that house, and it went by both of them like a bird. The third thing was Ephraim. Over 10 days, Ellery Vance never once saw Ephraim Sizemore inside the house. Not once. Not to eat, not to sleep, not to warm his hands on a frosty morning. He saw him in the yard, in the barn, at the edge of the trees, at the spring house. He ate on the porch, off a plate Rilla set outside the kitchen door on the boards, and he ate standing up. On the 4th day, Vance asked about it, carefully. Absalom said, "Eph does not come in." Vance waited. Absalom said, "He has not come in the house since our father died. 9 years." And Vance, who was a decent man and thought he was being handed a family grief, said he was sorry to hear it. And Absalom Sizemore looked at him across the table with a mild face and said, "It is not a sad thing. He is where he is of use." The fourth thing was in the loft, and it is the one that meant nothing to him at the time and everything to him 8 days later, and I am putting it here in its proper place rather than saving it, because you deserve to have it when he had it. On the 15th of October, he went up into the barn loft in the middle of the day to look at the hay, because he had it in mind to buy some for the drovers coming behind, and because a livestock man cannot walk past a loft without putting his hand in it. The hay was good. That is worth saying. It was 2-year Timothy, dry, sweet, mouse-run but sound, and there was better than 4 tons of it, and it was the only thing on that place he ever thought about buying, and did not. At the north end of the loft, under the hay door, there was a hollow in the hay, not a place where hay had been pulled down. A hollow, worn, packed, shaped a place about the size of a man sitting with his back against the end wall, and his knees up, with the hay pressed down hard and smooth around it, the way a dog's bed in a haystack is smooth. It had been sat in a great many times over a great many years. There was a candle stub on the sill of the hay door, with a good inch of tallow left on it, and a black wick, and on the rafter directly above the hollow, at about the height of a sitting man's face, somebody had scratched marks into the wood with a knife point. Hundreds of them. Vance got up on the hay and looked at them close. They were not tally marks. They were letters, the same few letters, over and over, dozens of times each, in rows, badly made at the left-hand end of the rafter and better made further along, and running the whole length of it and on to the next. A capital A, 40 or 50 times, A capital B, a lowercase a, with the loop not closing. A word he could make out and cut 11 times in a row, the 11th one clean and square, and the first one barely a word at all. He stood on 4 tons of Timothy hay in a barn with no windows in Tallow County, Kentucky, and looked at somebody's alphabet cut into a rafter over 10 or 12 years, and he did not understand what he was looking at, and he came down the ladder, and he did not mention it to anybody, he thought, and this is what he told the minister Coyle, and I believe him, because it is exactly what any of us would think he thought it was a child's idle work, some Sizemore boy, years back, with a knife and nothing to do. What it actually was a man teaching himself to read. In the only place on 40 acres where a body is let alone, out of a testament a peddler sold his father at cost in 1871, in a loft over a runway, over a barred third stall, over a hole in the limestone, by the light of a candle stub, 1 letter at a time, for 4 years, with nobody helping and nobody knowing, and at the end of it, at 22 years old, he could read, and he never told a living soul until midnight on the 23rd of October, 1883, when a man on the other side of a door asked him to say a thing that had never been said in that house. That rafter was the proof, and Ellery Vance had stood under it 8 days early with his hand on it, and had not known. I think about that more than I ought to. There was one good thing in that barn. It was directly over the worst thing in it, at the far end from the warm, and it was cut into a beam with a knife point, and it was an alphabet. The fourth thing was the hats. On the 5th day, the 16th of October, Ellery Vance had reason to go into the corn crib. He had bought a mare from a family 2 miles up the hollow, and he wanted a piece of rope, and Wade told him there was rope in the crib, and Vance went and got it. The crib was a log building, older than the house, chinked, with a plank floor a foot off the ground. There was corn in it, a decent crop. There was harness on pegs. There was rope, and on the back wall, on nails, in a row, high up where a man would not look unless he was looking for something on the wall, there were hats, 17 of them, slouch hats, mostly, 2 derbies, 1 good beaver hat that would have cost real money, 1 straw. They were all men's hats. They were all adult sizes. They were in every condition from nearly new to rotted through, and the rotted ones were at the left end of the row, and the newer ones were at the right end, which meant they had been hung up in order, over years, by somebody who was adding to a row. Ellery Vance stood in the door of that corn crib with a coil of rope in his hand and did the arithmetic that you are doing right now. And then he did what almost anybody would have done, which is that he made it make sense. He told himself, this is a lodging house. Men leave things, 31 years of travelers passing through, and a hat left behind now and then, and a family too thrifty to throw a hat away. 17 hats in 31 years is 1 hat every 22 months. That is nothing. That is a perfectly ordinary rate of hat abandonment. That is genuinely a reasonable argument. I want to be fair to him. He was not a fool. He built himself a good argument in about 4 seconds, standing in a doorway with his heart going. And then it fell over, because he looked at the row again, and he saw that the hats had been cleaned, brushed. The beaver hat had been brushed and shaped, and the crown had been packed with paper so it would keep its form. You do not brush and block and pack a hat that a stranger left behind and you cannot return. You do that to a hat you are keeping. He put the rope over his shoulder and walked out of the crib, and did not look back at it, and he went and bought a mare and shook hands with a farmer named Cobb, and rode back to the stand and ate his supper, and said nothing at all. That night he lay in the east room with his pistol under his pillow, and worked the whole thing over. And he came to the conclusion that a great many men in a great many bad places have come to, which is, I have no proof of anything, and I have $410 on my body, and I am 11 miles from anybody, and the safest thing I can do is finish my business, be pleasant, and ride out. That was a correct conclusion. He was right. If he had ridden out on the morning of the 17th of October, 1883, he would have gone home, and this would be a story about a strange week at a stand in Tallow County, and there would be no story. He did not ride out on the 17th. And the reason he did not ride out is Rilla. On the morning of the 17th, Ellery Vance came down early, earlier than the house was used to, before daylight, because he had not slept, and there was nobody in the kitchen but the woman. She was at the stove with her back to him. There was one lamp lit. He said good morning to her, and Rilla said, without turning around, and in a completely flat voice, the way you would read a line out of a ledger, do not go in the barn after dark. Do not answer to your name in the yard, and when you leave, leave in the morning, and do not stop when you are called. Ellery Vance stood in that kitchen doorway. He said, Ma'am. She said, I have said it now. I will not say it again. And if you tell them I said it, I will say you are lying, and they will believe me over you, and it will go worse for you than you can think. And then she turned around and looked at him. And Ellery Vance, who told this part of the story only twice in his life, said that she was a young woman with an old face, and that her hands were shaking so badly that she had to put down the coffee pot, and that she looked at him and said one more thing that was not in the 3. She said, How long has your wife been dead? He said, 4 years. And Rilla said, Then you have less time than the ones who never lost anybody. And Absalom Sizemore came down the stairs whistling, and Rilla turned back to the stove, and the day began. And that same evening, the evening of the 17th of October, 1883, a second traveler rode into the yard of the Sizemore stand. I have been keeping this back, because I wanted you to have Rilla's warning first, and because what happened over the following 15 hours is the single best look anybody ever got at how that place actually worked, and I did not want you watching it without knowing what you were watching. His name was Elbert Coffey. He was 24 years old. He came up out of Rockcastle County on a gray horse at about 5 in the afternoon with a good coat on and a valise behind his saddle, and he was going to Manchester, because he was getting married there on Saturday. He said so in the yard before he was off his horse. He said it to Absalom Sizemore in about the first 40 seconds, the way a young man will, because he had been riding alone for 2 days with it and had nobody to tell. Ellery Vance was standing at the corner of the house when he rode in, and he watched the whole of it. Absalom came off the porch with his hands up and open and said, "Well, there is a fellow who has run out of daylight," which was word for word what he had said to Vance 6 days earlier, and which told Vance something about how many times that sentence had been used in 31 years. 75 cents. Bed, supper, breakfast, animals fed and watered. Elbert Coffey paid it and was glad to. Now, Vance had been in that house 6 days by then. He had heard nothing yet in the yard that was still 1 night away, but he had the hats, and he had Rilla's 3, and he had a mare that would not eat, and he had a stall with a bar on the outside of it, and he had made up his mind about the shape of the place, if not the substance of it. So he did what any decent man would do. He set out to get that young man alone for 2 minutes. He could not do it. I want to walk you through the evening, because it is a small masterpiece of something, and because when you see it laid out, you will understand why 19 people went into that hollow in 12 years, and not one of them was ever warned by another guest. From the moment Elbert Coffey came into the yard until the moment he rode out the next morning, there was never a time when Thomas Ellery Vance was in a room with him, and no Sizemore in it. Not once. Not for 30 seconds. At supper, Absalom sat at the head, Coffey on one side, Vance on the other, and Absalom talked the entire meal and directed the conversation at both of them in turn, so that neither of them ever had a private thread going. After supper, Vance got up and went out onto the porch, hoping the young man would follow, and he did. And Wade Sizemore came out with the pair of them and sat down on the step with a knife and a piece of cedar, and whittled for 40 minutes, and did not say one word. Vance went to the barn at 9 to put his mare up. Coffey came out to see to his gray. Ephraim Sizemore was in the barn with a lantern the entire time, standing in the runway, doing nothing. At about 10, Vance went up the stairs and stood on the landing and waited, because Coffey was to sleep in the west room and would have to come up, and there would be 4 feet of hallway and maybe 15 seconds. And Absalom Sizemore came up the stairs with him, carrying a candle for him, and walked him to the door of the west room and said good night, and went into his own room, which was the same room. Vance lay awake most of that night, with his door cracked an inch. At about 5 in the morning he heard Coffey get up, and he came out into the hallway in his stocking feet in the dark, and the boy was on the landing, and Vance said his name low, and Elbert Coffey turned around. And Ellery Vance had him, finally, with nobody in the world between them, and he could not do it, he said afterward. And he said this more than once. And he never forgave himself for it, and I am not going to pretend I know what I would have done, he said. I stood there, and I had it in my mouth, and I looked at that boy's face. He was 24 years old, and he was going to be married on Saturday, and he was up at 5 in the morning because he could not sleep for being happy, and I had a barred stall and some hats. And I thought, if I say this to him now, one of 2 things is going to happen. Either he thinks I am mad, and he goes down them stairs and says to Absalom Sizemore over his breakfast, "There is a fellow upstairs telling me you are murdering travelers, and then I am in this house tonight, and they know what I know." Or he believes me, and he rides out of here in the dark, alone, on that road, at 5 in the morning. So I asked him if he wanted a match for his candle, and he said, "No, thank you, sir," and he went down the stairs. I have had 50 years of that. There is not a thing in this whole business I have thought about more, and I have never once got to the bottom of whether I was a coward or whether I was right, and I would like to know before I go, and I do not expect I will. Elbert Coffey ate his breakfast at 6:30 on the morning of the 18th of October, 1883, and at that table, over the eggs, Absalom Sizemore asked him the question. He asked it the way he had asked Vance on the 11th warmly, in the middle of something else, in the natural course of two men getting acquainted. He asked whether he had family, and Elbert Coffey said that he had his mother and father both living at Mount Vernon, and 4 brothers and 2 sisters all living, and that he was going to Manchester to marry a girl named Sarah, and that her people were all living too, and he laughed, and said that between the two of them there was not a black dress in the county. And Ellery Vance, sitting at that table with a coffee cup in his hand, watched Absalom Sizemore's face. And nothing happened. The warmth did not go off it. The interest did not flicker. He said the right things, and he laughed at the joke about the black dress, and he asked about the girl's people, and he asked what the young man did, and he was, for the whole of that breakfast, the most agreeable host in eastern Kentucky. And Vance said that he knew, sitting there watching a man be kind to a boy, that a decision had already been made, and had taken no time at all, and had cost nobody anything. Elbert Coffey rode out of the yard of the Sizemore stand at about 7 in the morning on the 18th of October, 1883, down the Coldwater Fork, on a gray horse, whistling. The road was open. The cane at the second ford was not there. He went down that fork and came out the other end and got to Manchester and married a girl named Sarah on Saturday the 20th, and never knew one single thing about any of it for the rest of his life. Ellery Vance went into the front room 3 days later, on the 20th, and took that register off the shelf, and among the 4 entries for October of 1883 he found Elbert Coffey, Rockcastle Co., dated the 17th. There was no mark beside it. Nothing in the margin. Clean paper. And there, in about 4 seconds, standing in a cold front room, Thomas Ellery Vance understood the machine he was inside of, all at once, the way you understand a thing you have been staring at for a week. They were not choosing the rich ones. Elbert Coffey had a good coat and a good horse and a valise, and was almost certainly carrying money for a wedding. He was a far softer mark than a livestock buyer with a colt. They were not choosing the ones traveling alone. They both were. They were not choosing the ones nobody would miss. Elbert Coffey had 2 parents, 6 brothers and sisters, and a bride expecting him on Saturday. If that boy had gone missing on that road, there would have been 40 men up that hollow inside a week. That is exactly why he was safe. That is part of it. That is the husbandry. But it is not the whole of it, and Vance knew it was not, because he had sat at that table on the 11th of October and answered the same question with the words, "She died 4 years back," and there was a mark beside his name before he had his boots off. They were choosing the ones who had lost somebody, because the thing in that hole did not eat men and did not rob them. It had one hook, and the hook only worked on a certain kind of person, and that kind of person cannot be identified by his coat or his horse or his money. But he can be identified across a supper table in about 90 seconds by a likable man with a good story about a mule asking a warm question. Are you married? That is the whole apparatus. 31 years, 11.5 miles of cut brush, a barn with no windows, a swept runway, a fair price, a good cook, and one question asked kindly on the first night. And everything else in this case follows from it. Ellery Vance tried, in 1904, 21 years later, to find out what became of Elbert Coffey. He wrote 2 letters. He got an answer from a county clerk. Elbert Coffey of Rockcastle County, Kentucky, married Sarah in 1883, had 6 children, farmed, buried his father in 1899 and his mother in 1902, and died in 1929 at 70 years old. He lodged one night at a stand on the Coldwater Fork on his way to be married, and he ate a good supper, and he slept sound, and in the morning a strange, quiet man on a landing asked him if he wanted a match for his candle. There is a version of this story where that is the whole of it, and where nobody ever hears about any of it, and where the 17th of October, 1883, is a night nobody remembers. There are 800 of those nights in that register. Now that is 3 warnings from a storekeeper and 3 warnings from a woman in the house. And there is a pattern here that Ellery Vance did not have the leisure to notice at the time, but that we can see from where we sit. Everybody who warned him gave him exactly 3 things, and every one of them said they would not speak of it again. That is not coincidence, and it is not a storytelling flourish. In that country, in that period, a warning given in 3s and closed off was a form. It was the shape you used when you believed that talking about a thing gave the thing purchase. You said 3. You said it once. You shut your mouth. Audie Redwine would explain that to him later, at the head of the hollow, and I will let her do it in her own words when we get there. He did not leave on the 17th. He stayed, because Rilla's warning did the opposite of what she intended. If she had said, "Get out," he might have gone. Instead, she gave him 3 specific, survivable, operational rules. Do not go in the barn after dark. Do not answer to your name. Leave in the morning. And a man's mind hears rules as a kind of safety. Rules mean somebody has been here before and lived. Rules mean this is a thing that can be handled correctly. He wrote all 3 of them down. On a page of the small memorandum book he carried to record purchases on the 17th of October, 1883, between an entry for a bay mare bought from a man named Cobb for $19 and an entry for 2 heifers, Thomas Ellery Vance wrote 3 lines in pencil. That memorandum book still existed in 1954. 2 of the 3 lines are still legible. The page is stained, and the 3rd line is gone. And he stayed and did his business, and on the night of the 18th of October, the small wrongness stopped being small. The 18th was a Thursday. He had been out all day up the hollow. He came in at dusk, put his mare up himself, ate supper, and went up to the east room at about 9. The thing that happened on the night of the 18th of October happened in 3 stages over about 90 minutes, and I am going to give it to you in order and at the speed it happened, because the speed is the point. Nothing about it was fast. Stage 1. At some time before 11, lying awake, he became aware that there was a light in the yard. He got up and went to the window. There was a lantern out by the barn down at the south end of it, at the far corner, which was not where the door was. It was sitting on the ground. He could see the circle of it on the grass. There was nobody with it. He watched it for about 20 minutes. It did not move. Nobody came to it, and nobody took it away. And then it went out. Not guttered, not flickered down. It went out between one blink and the next, and the yard was black. Stage 2. About 10 minutes after the lantern went out, the guineas started. If you have never been around guinea fowl, understand that they are a burglar alarm with legs. They make a racket at a fox, a dog, a stranger, a falling apple. They went up all together at 11-something at night in a flat panic, and then they stopped. All of them, at the same instant, mid-cry. Vance was very clear on this in every account. The sound did not fall off. It was cut, like a door closing on it. And after they stopped, the whole bottom was silent. No creak, again, no creak. Stage 3. And this is the one. Ellery Vance was standing at the window of the east room in the dark with his hand on the frame when somebody in the yard said his name. A woman's voice, not loud, conversational. The volume you would use for somebody about 15 feet away. She said, "Ellery, Nell, I told you to hold 3 things." She hummed off key, and never the same amount off. She tapped her thumbnail twice on a cup before she drank, and she called him Ellery. Never Tom, not once in 5 years. And in the whole of Tallow County, Kentucky, in 1883, there was not one living human being who knew that name. He had introduced himself at that table as Thomas Vance. He had signed the register, and there was a register, and I will come back to the register, because the register is how the county eventually got its 19 names. He had signed it. Those, E. Vance, Bourbon Co. He had said Ellery out loud in that hollow exactly one time. On the first night, at supper, telling Absalom Sizemore about a dead wife who used to call him that, in a warm kitchen, with the youngest brother sitting on a stool by the woodbox. And now it was in the yard. He did not answer. He wants credit for that, and he should have it. A man standing at a window in the dark, 4 years widowed, hearing the one name in the world only she used, and he did not answer. But he did not step back from the window either. He stood there with his hand on the frame, and he looked down into a black yard, and he said nothing. And his heart was going so hard he could feel it in his teeth. And after about 30 seconds, the voice said it again, Ellery. And then, after another pause, in the same conversational tone, from the same place, it said, Come see, I am cold out here. And here is the detail that finished him, that took this out of the country of, I was tired and heard something forever. She was humming underneath it, before and after the words, lo, the way she used to hum, without knowing she was doing it while she worked at something with her hands. The tune was one he knew, and it was off-key. And it was off-key by the exact same amount every single time, on every single repetition, like a thing that had been learned. Delia never did that. Delia was never wrong the same way twice. Thomas Ellery Vance stood at that window and listened to something in a black yard hum his dead wife's tune with mechanical precision. And the thing that saved his life was not courage. It was an error of craftsmanship. Somebody had copied her, and copied her well, and copied her a little too well, and a man who had spent 5 years listening to that woman get a tune wrong in 100 different ways heard a machine get it wrong in one way over and over. He backed away from the window. He got the pistol. He sat on the floor with his back against the wall on the far side of the bed, where he could see the door and the window both, and he stayed there. The voice said his name 11 times. He counted. That was the first counting he ever did in that hollow, and he did it for no reason except that a man with nothing to hold on to will hold on to a number. And it is worth noticing, because in 3 more days a number was going to be the only thing between him and whatever was in that barn. 11 times. And in between, it hummed. And once one time, at around the 8th or 9th, it laughed. It laughed the way Delia used to laugh at her own story before she got to the end of it, all in one breath with her whole chest. And there was nothing to laugh at. Nobody had said anything. There was no story. It was a laugh with no joke in front of it, played out into an empty yard in the dark at midnight in October, because whatever was out there had learned that this woman laughed, and had not been able to learn why. Then it stopped. The creek came back. The guineas made a small, sleepy complaint, and nothing else happened that night. At first light, Ellery Vance went down the stairs with his boots in his hand, and out the kitchen door, and around to the east side of the house, under the window of his room, in the wet frost. He was looking for footprints. There was heavy frost on the grass, and the ground was soft. And this is where I want to slow down, because most people, when they tell this part, tell it wrong. They say, there were no prints. That would be its own kind of horror, and it would be the ordinary kind. There were prints. There was a single line of them, a woman's size or near it, barefoot, coming out of the grass from the direction of the barn, crossing the yard, stopping directly below the window of the east room. Standing there was a place where they had stood a long while, both feet side by side, the frost melted out in 2 clean patches, and then going back, and the prints going back to the barn were the same feet, in the same direction of travel, and the stride was 11 inches longer. Ellery Vance measured it with a piece of harness leather and his handspan, standing in a frosty yard at 6 in the morning on the 19th of October, 1883. because he needed it to be wrong, and it was not wrong. The same feet had walked out to his window at a woman's ordinary walk, and had stood under it for some while, and had gone back to the barn at a stride no woman of that foot size could take. Not running. He was very clear that it was not running. A running stride does not just lengthen, it changes the whole print, the toe digs, the heel lifts. These were the same flat, even, unhurried prints, just longer. Whatever had come to the window walking as a woman had gone back to the barn as something taller. He followed the line of them across the yard with his eyes, and they went to the south end of the barn, the far end, the end with no door, the end that was warm, and at the base of the wall, 18 inches from the boards, they stopped. Not turned, not scuffed, stopped. The frost between those last prints and the barn wall was undisturbed. He stood in that yard for a long time. And behind him, from the porch, Absalom Sizemore said, "You are up early." Ellery Vance turned around. Absalom was in the doorway in his shirt sleeves with a cup of coffee. Wade was behind him in the dark of the kitchen. Rilla was not visible. And Ephraim Sizemore was standing at the corner of the spring house, 40 feet to Vance's left, and had been there, apparently, the entire time. And Absalom Sizemore looked at the line of prints in the frost, and he looked at Ellery Vance, and he said, in the friendliest voice you ever heard, "Did you sleep?" And that is the moment Thomas Ellery Vance understood that everyone in that house knew, not suspected, knew what it was, knew it had been in the yard, knew it had been at his window, and had lain in their beds and listened to it call a dead woman's pet name at a paying guest, and had come down in the morning and started the coffee. He said, "I slept fine." Absalom said, "Good. Frost is heavy. Cobb will be wanting to sell you that other mare before it gets any colder." And he went back inside. Now, Ellery Vance had $410, a good mare, a mule, daylight, and 11.5 miles of road between him and Beaver Ford. Why in God's name did he not leave? I have thought about this for a long time. He was asked it directly by the minister Coyle in 1928 when he was 79 years old. And his answer is the truest and most terrible thing in this entire case. And I am going to give it to you exactly as Coyle wrote it down that same evening. He said, "Because she called me Ellery," he said. "You are asking a sensible question, and I will give you the answer, and the answer is not sensible. I knew it was not her. I knew it that first night, when it hummed. I knew it in my bones, and I never once, not for 1 hour, believed my wife was in that yard. And I could not leave, because it had her voice. And in 4 years I had gone from being a man who could not stop hearing her voice to being a man who could not quite remember it. That is what happens. Nobody tells you that. You think grief is the pain of remembering. It is not. It turns into the pain of the remembering going out, a little at a time, like a lamp somebody is turning down in another room while you are trying to read. And on the 18th of October, 1883, something in a barn in Tallow County gave it back to me. Wrong, but gave it back. I stayed 3 more nights, Reverend, and I have had 51 years to be ashamed of it, and I do not know that I am. That is the hook this place used, not fear. It did not hunt men with hunger, and it did not hunt them with fright, because fear puts a man on a horse. It hunted them with the one thing a grieving man will walk toward with his eyes open and his hands empty. And that is why Absalom Sizemore asked every guest at that supper table, in the middle of a funny story about a mule, whether he was married. Because the whole business, the good food, the fair price, the 31 years, the 11.5 miles of cut brush, the row of brushed hats in the crib, the whole business, ran on one question, asked warmly, on the first night, by a likable man with his hands open and up. "Are you married?" And there were 19 answers to it that we know of. And on the 19th of October, 1883, there was one man left in the East Room who had answered it, and who was still breathing, and who had 3 days to go. I said I would come back to the register, and I will now, briefly, because you need it before the next part. The Sizemore stand kept a register. Most stands did. It was a bound book, and it sat on a shelf in the front room by the door, and every traveler who paid signed it. Ellery Vance had signed it on the 11th. On the morning of the 20th of October, with the family out of the house, Absalom and Wade gone up the hollow with the team, Ephraim somewhere out of sight, Rilla at the spring house, Thomas Ellery Vance did the single most dangerous thing he did in 10 days. He took that register off the shelf and read it. It ran from 1852. 31 years of names in 5 or 6 different hands. And what he found in it is where this story stops being about a haunted barn and starts being about what 3 men in a hollow had built, on purpose, over 3 decades, and had gotten so good at that they had a system, and the system had a written record, and the written record had a pattern in it that Ellery Vance saw in about 4 minutes, and that no sheriff would see for another 8 years, because there was a mark beside certain names, not every name, roughly 1 in 9, a small pencil mark in the margin, the same mark every time, made by the same hand across 31 years, which is impossible, because no man writes in the same hand for 31 years, and which is the second impossible thing in this story, and which I will explain. And beside those marked names, in that same margin, in that same hand, there was in every case a single word. I will tell you what the word was. But first I have to tell you what he found in the wall of the East Room on the night of the 20th, 3 hours after he put that register back on the shelf, because a peddler named Silas Meek had stayed in that same room in the winter of 1874 and had done what Vance did, and had understood it faster than Vance did, and had written it all down, and had hidden it where only a man who slept badly and stared at the walls would ever find it. Silas Meek's daybook ran from June of 1871 to the 11th of February, 1874. It is the closest thing to a primary source that this case has. It explains the mark and the word and the third stall and what is under the barn and why there were never any bones. It ends in the middle of a sentence. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me put you in that front room on the morning of the 20th of October, 1883, with the book open in a man's hands and the house empty around him. The register of the Sizemore stand was a bound ledger, foolscap size, with a marbled cover gone soft at the corners. The first entry in it was dated the 9th of April, 1852. 31 years and 6 months of travelers on 11.5 miles of Creek Road. It was not a busy road. Some years had 40 names in them, some had less than 20. Vance did not count the whole book. He did not have time, and he knew he did not have time. But a man who has since gone through the surviving pages puts the total somewhere between 800 and 900 names. Most pages were unremarkable. Name, county, date, sometimes a destination. Peddlers, cattlemen like himself, a surveyor, 2 circuit preachers, a family of 6 moving to Missouri in 1861, who signed as one line and are one of the very few entries in that book that anybody has ever been able to trace forward because they got to Missouri and their descendants are there now. Ellery Vance turned pages, and after about 2 minutes he began to see it. There was a mark. It sat in the left margin beside a name, and it was small, a short vertical pencil stroke, about 1/4 inch, with a single dot beneath it. Nothing you would notice reading 1 page. Something you could not stop noticing once you had seen 3. And beside the mark, out in the margin where a bookkeeper puts a note to himself, there was 1 word, the same word, every time. The word was kept. He went back to the beginning and went through it properly, and the pattern came up out of the paper at him the way a face comes up out of a pattern in wallpaper when you have looked at it long enough in the dark. Roughly 1 name in 9 carried the mark. Never 2 in the same week. Never 2 in the same month, so far as he could see. They were spaced. They were rationed, and after every marked name, without exception, there was a gap, not a gap in the paper, a gap in time. A marked name on the 4th of June, and then the next entry in the book dated the 9th of July. A marked name in November, and then nothing until the middle of December. 5 weeks, 6 weeks. Once, in the winter of 1866, 11 weeks. A lodging house on a road with 40 travelers a year does not take 5 weeks off. Travelers do not know to stop coming. Travelers do not confer. The gaps were not the stand refusing custom. The gaps were the stand not needing any. Ellery Vance, standing in a cold front room with the sun not yet over the east ridge, worked out in his head what it meant that something in a hollow ate roughly 1 man in 9 and then was not hungry again for a month, and had been doing it since before he was born, and had done it, by his rough arithmetic, somewhere close to 90 times. 90. The county would eventually be able to prove 19, and only 19, and only because 19 families were literate enough and stubborn enough and near enough to write letters and keep writing them. That is what a proven number is. A proven number is not a count of the dead. It is a count of the mourned who had postage. Then there was the hand. Every one of those marks and every one of those words, across 31 years and 6 months, was made in the same handwriting. I want to make sure you feel the size of that. A man's hand changes. It changes with his eyes, with his health, with the pen, with the light, with his age. A man of 20 and the same man of 50 do not make the same letters. Nobody's hand survives 3 decades unchanged. Every kept in that book was identical, not similar. Identical in the way that 11 apple trees in an orchard were identical. The same pressure, the same slant, the same little hook coming off the tail of the T, the same distance between the mark and the word. Ellery Vance had been a buyer for 15 years, and had signed and read a great many papers, and he stood there and turned back and forth between 1854 and 1882, 28 years apart, and held the pages side by side against the window light, and they were the same word written twice by the same hand on the same afternoon. He said later that this was the exact moment, not the voice in the yard, not the prince in the frost, that he stopped being a frightened man and became a man in a trap, because a voice in the yard is a thing that happens to you. A pencil mark made in the same hand for 31 years is a thing that has been running for 31 years on a schedule with a bookkeeper. And then he turned to the last written page, which was the current page, which was October of 1883. There were 4 entries for that autumn. A tinware peddler in September. A man and his son in the first week of October going to Manchester. A woman traveling with a hired driver on the 9th. And the 4th entry, those. E. Vance, Bourbon Co., in his own handwriting, dated the 11th. There was a mark beside it. Beside the mark, in that same margin, in that same unchanging hand, was the word kept. And underneath the word there was a place where the paper had been scuffed and thinned, the way paper is when something has been rubbed out of it with a crumb of bread or the ball of a thumb. Something else had been written there first. Something had been decided and then unwritten, and then kept had been put down over the top of it. He held that page up to the window and turned it to the light and tried to read the ghost of what had been erased, and he got 2 things and no more. He got that it had been longer than kept 5 or 6 letters, maybe 7, and he got that the last letter of it had a descender, a tail that went below the line, like a G or a Y. He never found out what it said. Neither has anybody else. I have my own opinion about it, and I am going to keep it to myself until the very end of this, and then I will give it to you, and you can tell me in the comments whether you think I am right." He put the register back on the shelf, square to the edge, the way it had been. Then he went out and put a saddle on his mare in broad daylight with his hands shaking, and Wade Sizemore came around the corner of the barn and saw him doing it, and neither of them said anything for a long moment. And then Wade said, "Not today." Vance said he thought today suited him fine, and Wade Sizemore, 22 years old, the youngest of 3 brothers, standing in a barn lot in Tallow County, said, "Absalom has took the team down to the second ford. He will be on the road till dark. If you go down the fork today, you will meet him on it." Vance said, "And if I meet him on it?" And Wade said, "Then you will have met him on it 11 miles from anybody, and I cannot help you there. Here I can put a light in a window. There I cannot do nothing." Then he said, "Go tomorrow, early, first light. I will have your mule fed before you are awake, and the crib door open, so you do not have to ask nobody for nothing." And then he said the sentence that I think about more than almost anything else in this case. He said it looking at the ground. He said, "I have not carried one yet." Ellery Vance did not know what that meant. He would know by the day after tomorrow, and when he understood it, he understood that the youngest Sizemore brother had been standing in that lot, telling him the one true thing about himself that he had, and asking a stranger to witness it in case there was nobody left later to say it for him. Vance took the saddle back off. It was the second time in his life he had ever done something that stupid on the word of a stranger, and the first time had been standing in a store in Beaver Ford 9 days earlier, ignoring a woman who was right. He spent the rest of that day in a state I recognize, and you probably do too, the state where you have decided on your plan, and now you have to survive the waiting, and every hour is a room you have to walk the length of. He rode out and pretended to look at stock. He came back at 4. He ate supper. Absalom came in at dusk with the team, cheerful, and told a story about a preacher and a wagon wheel that Vance later admitted was extremely funny, and that he laughed at, and that he could not for the life of him ever afterward remember the end of. At about 8:30, he took a candle up to the east room and closed the door and put the chair under the latch. And because he had 9 hours to get through and no chance whatsoever of sleeping, he sat on the bed and looked at the room. He had slept in it 9 nights. He had never looked at it. It was a plain room, whitewashed plank walls, a wainscot of wide boards running about waist high, then plaster and lath above, rope bed, straw tick, washstand, 1 chair, 1 small square window facing east. And as he sat there with the candle on the washstand, he saw that 1 board of the wainscot on the north wall, behind where the head of the bed stood, was out of plumb, not by much. It leaned in at the top by something less than 1/4 of an inch, so that the shadow of the candle lay along its edge a hair differently than along the edge of its neighbors. 9 days of small wrongness in that hollow had trained him. He got up and moved the bed out from the wall. The board came away in his hand with almost no resistance. It had been cut clean at the top and bottom and set back in place, and it had been going in and out of that wall so many times that the nail holes had gone soft. Behind it, between the studs, in the dead space above the sill plate, there was an oilcloth packet, tied with a bootlace. Ellery Vance sat down on the floor of the east room of the Sizemore stand, with his back against the bed, and untied it, and inside there was a book. It was a peddler's day book, about 7 inches by 4, bound in scuffed brown leather with a flap. The kind of book a man carries in his coat to write down what he has sold, and to whom and what he is owed. There were 60-odd leaves in it, and better than 50 of them were written on, front and back, in a small, cramped, sloping hand, in 3 different colors of ink, and, toward the end, in pencil. On the first page, in a careful copper plate, very different from the writing that followed, was written. Silas Meek. Notions, tin, and the Word. Bought and sold in Clay, Tallow, Owsley, and Perry counties, Kentucky. Begun June 1871. Ellery Vance read that book from 20 minutes to 9 on the night of the 20th of October, 1883, until the candle went out and he lit the second one, and then until that one was a stub. He took it with him when he left. That is why we have it. I am going to give you Silas Meek in his own words now, in his own voice, in the order he wrote them. I am not going to read you all 50 leaves. I am going to give you the ones that matter, and I am going to tell you plainly when I have skipped something and why. His spelling is his own, and I am going to keep it where it does not slow us down. He begins as a man selling tin. June the 9th, 1871. Come up the Coldwater from Beaver Ford, 11 mile and a half, and lodged at the stand of one A. Sizemore, 75 cents, which is a fair price and no more, and the supper was better than fair. Sold to the woman of the house 2 papers of pins, a card of hooks, and a tin funnel, 40 cents the lot. Sold to A. Sizemore nothing, he wanting nothing, but he bought a testament off me at cost for the youngest boy, who is 10 years old and cannot read and is to be taught. There is a great quiet on this bottom. I slept sound. That is the 9th of June, 1871. That is a peddler having a good night. The youngest boy, who is 10 years old and cannot read and is to be taught, is Wade Sizemore, who 12 years later would stand in a barn lot and say, "I have not carried one yet." Meek came back in September of that year, and again in the spring of 1872. He liked the stand. He said so repeatedly. He sold to the family, and he sold to the 4 households up the hollow, and it was a good stop on a poor route. And then, on the 16th of April, 1872, woke at some hour with the room cold as a spring house, and lay listening, and a woman was in the yard below and spoke to me by name. Not Silas, not Mr. Meek. She said, "Sissy," which is what my sister Ann called me, being unable at 3 years old to say Silas, and which she called me for all of her 19 years, and which no living soul has called me since she went in 1859. I did not answer. I got down beside the bed and prayed till day. In the morning the family was as it always is. I have thought on it all the way to Beaver Ford. I am not a fanciful man. I have no explanation, and I will set it down and leave it. He left it for 4 months. He came back in August, and here is where Silas Meek stops being a peddler and starts being the only person in 31 years who did what somebody should have done. August the 11th, 1872. I have come back. I could not stay away, and I want to be honest in this book if I am honest nowhere else. So I did not come back for the trade. The trade on this fork is $3 in a good week. I came back because of Ann. I want to hear it again. There. It is written. God forgive me. I want to hear it again, and I know what that makes me, and I have preached at men for less. Ellery Vance, sitting on the floor of that room 11 years later with $410 in a belt under his shirt and a dead wife's pet name still ringing in his skull, read that paragraph in a peddler's cramped hand, and understood that he was not the first man to be caught by this, and that he was not going to be the last, and that, whatever was in that barn had a lure it did not have to change, because grief does not go out of fashion. Meek stayed at the stand 11 times between August of 1872 and February of 1874. 11 times in 18 months, on a route that did not justify it, at 75 cents a night out of a $3 week, and he watched. That is the thing about Silas Meek. He was caught, and he knew he was caught, and he decided that if he was going to be caught, he would at least be useful. And he wrote down everything. He worked out the register. October the 2nd, 1872. There is a book by the door, and I have read in it. There is a mark against some names, and the word kept by the mark. I counted the marks on 11 leaves. There is 1 in 9 or thereabout, and after a mark, the leaf goes empty a month or more. A. Sizemore did not write those marks. I have seen A. Sizemore write. He writes a big, slow, round hand, like a boy at a slate. The marks are made by a small, tight hand that has not altered since 1852, and I have compared them, and they are all the same hand, and no hand does that. I do not know who keeps that book. I know it is not kept by anybody I have ate a supper with. He worked out the barn. March the 4th, 1873. The barn was raised in 1852 by the father, Jephthah Sizemore, who is dead these 5 years. Rufe Cobb up the hollow told me so, and told me more. Being in liquor, the barn is set over a sink. This is limestone country, and it is honeycomb below. The creek that runs this bottom goes under at the lower end, and comes out again 3 miles down, and there is a great deal of country in between where the water is and no man has ever been. Rufe Cobb says there was a hole in that ground before the barn, and that as a boy he was carried there by his uncle to look at it, and it was a hole a wagon would go in, and the air came up out of it warm in winter. He says Jephthah Sizemore built the barn over the hole. He says the 3rd stall on the left is over it. He says the floor of that stall is not dirt. I told you at the beginning that the 3rd stall was the whole of it. That is the first time in any surviving document that anybody put it in writing. Now, what is down there? Silas Meek never says, because Silas Meek did not know, and I am going to be straight with you. Nobody in this entire case ever gets a good look at it, and if you have been waiting 100 minutes for me to hand you a monster with a description, I am not going to do it. And it is not because I am being coy. It is because every single person who got close enough to describe it is one of the 19, but Meek gave it a name for his own use, and the name is the best thing in the book. He called it the tenant. I will not call it a devil. I have preached devils for 20 years off the back of a wagon, and I find I do not want to use the word here, because a devil is a thing with a will against God, and this has no more will against God than a fox has against a hen. It is a thing that lives in a hole and takes what is brought. Jephthah Sizemore did not raise up a devil. He found a hole with something in it, and he built a barn over the top of it, and he made an arrangement, the same as a man makes an arrangement with a landlord. So I will call it the tenant, and the Sizemores may be the landlords if they like, but I have seen who pays the rent. And then, on the 19th of May, 1873, Silas Meek wrote down the single most useful paragraph anybody wrote about the Coldwater Fork in 31 years, and it is the key to the whole thing. And once you have it, every strange detail in this story clicks over like tumblers in a lock. I have got hold of the shape of it at last, and I will put it plain. It cannot make anything new. It can copy. It copies better than anything I ever heard of, but it cannot make. Every particular of it that has struck me as wrong is the same wrongness. It is a thing that has copied and cannot vary. Anne's voice in the yard says my name, the same, not near the same. The same, the way a bell struck twice, is the same. A living woman never said one word twice alike in her life. The trees in that orchard are of one size, because they are not 11 trees. They are one tree that has been set down 11 times. The hand in the book has not altered in 20 years, because it is not a hand. It is the memory of a hand. Whatever a man brings it, it can wear. It cannot invent so much as a hair. And so, if you would keep it off, you must give it a thing that has no copy in it. And then, 3 lines down, I have tried Scripture. It is the wrong medicine, and I have learned it the hard way, and I will set it down so that whoever comes after me does not try it. On the night of the 17th of May, I stood at the window with the thing in the yard, and I said the 23rd Psalm out loud, being frightened and having nothing else. It said it with me. It came in one word behind me at the first, and by the second verse it was level with me, and by the valley of the shadow it was ahead of me, saying my words before I said them. In Anne's voice, out of the dark, under my window. Scripture is learnt. Anything learnt, it can take off you. I stopped at, they comfort me. And I did not finish, and I have not finished it since. And I cannot say it now in a church without hearing her get to the end of it first. I would like you to sit with that for a second. A traveling preacher who could no longer say the 23rd Psalm. And then, on the 22nd of May, 1873, numbers. I have got it. A number is not learnt, it is made, one after the next, and there is no end of them and no two alike, and a thing that copies cannot go along with a man who is making. I stood at the window on the 20th, and I counted out loud, and it could not take it off me. It said my name in the gaps. It never once said a number. I counted to 400 and some, and it went away. Count out loud. Out loud is the whole of it must hear that you are making, and a man counting in his head is a man saying nothing. And do not lose your place. I nearly lost it at 300 and had a bad moment, and there is a cost in it, and I will be honest about the cost. While you count, it knows exactly where you are. It came and stood under the window and stayed there the whole time. I do not think it can come to you while you count. I am sure it can find you. There it is. That is the ritual, discovered by a tin peddler in a rented bed in 1873, and paid for by a man who could never finish a psalm again. Count out loud, keep your place, and understand that the counting is a light you are holding over your own head in the dark. Now, I said I would tell you when I skip. I am skipping about 14 leaves here, June of 1873 through Christmas, and I will tell you what is in them, in one breath. Silas Meek trying to get somebody to believe him. He wrote to a sheriff in Manchester and got no reply. He talked to a Baptist preacher at Beaver Ford who told him to stay off that fork and would not discuss it. He tried to warn a traveler at the stand itself, a young man from Rockcastle County, and could not get him alone, because, in Meek's words, there is always one of them in the room, and I have come to see that it is not chance, and that in 18 months I have not once been alone with a guest of that house for the space of 2 minutes. That young man from Rockcastle County has a mark beside his name. By January of 1874, Silas Meek's daybook has almost no trade in it at all. It is a surveillance log kept by a man coming apart. January the 11th, 1874. There is a woman upstairs in the front room, and I have never seen her. A plate goes up. The plate comes down empty. The floor takes weight, and it takes it slow. 2 steps and a wait, 2 steps and a wait. I asked A. Sizemore in an easy way after his mother, and he said she was well and thanked me for asking. I have asked at Beaver Ford, Mrs. Blount at the store, says Jephthah Sizemore's wife Melindy, was buried in the church ground at Beaver Ford in 1868, and she stood at the burying and helped carry the food. 6 years. There is somebody in that front room, and the family carries her supper up, and the family does not go up with it. Rilla carries it. Rilla is 19 years old, and come here with her people 2 years ago, and I do not know what happened to her people. Ellery Vance read that on the floor of the East Room in 1883, 9 years later, and he had been listening to that floor take weight over his head for 9 nights, 2 steps and a wait, and he had been watching a woman carry a plate up those stairs and bring it back down empty. And the woman was 30 now, instead of 19, and had told him not to answer to his name in the yard. The daybook of Silas Meek has 11 more entries after that. They are short and they are bad. He was staying at the stand nearly every week by then. He had stopped selling. He was, by his own account, sleeping badly, eating little, and hearing his sister's voice in the yard on most nights, whether or not there was anything in the yard. February the 2nd, 1874. Anne again, 3 hours. I counted the whole of it, 640 odd. My throat is raw with it. A.S. said at breakfast that I had been talking in my sleep, and did I want a powder for it? He was kind. That is the thing I cannot get past. He is kind. February the 7th, 1874. I am no good any more. I have took a fever twice. I cannot preach. I cannot look at my sister's likeness. Whatever it wears her voice for has wore it thin, and I am not sure now, in the day, in the light, which of the two of them I am remembering, and that is a thing I did not know could be done to a man. And the last entry, and I will give it whole, because it is the whole of it. February the 11th, 1874. I have thought and prayed, and I am settled. I do not think it will let me leave, and if it does let me leave, I know now that I will come back, because I have come back 11 times, and the 12th is not a thing I can promise against. So I will go and open the 3rd stall. I have got a bar and a lantern, and I have got the counting, and I mean to go tonight when the house is down, and I mean to see it, not to fight it. I am 44 years old, and I never fought nothing in my life. I want to see the thing that has been talking to me for 2 years, and I want to know if any part of what it gives back is her, because if there is 1 grain of her in it, then I have been wrong about everything, and there is a mercy in this hollow that I have took for a horror. If there is not, then I will have looked, and I will know, and I will go home to Owsley County and sell tin. Whoever finds this book, the counting works. Do it out loud. Do not lose your place. Do not say the name of your dead out loud on this ground, not once, not ever, for it takes the name out of your mouth and wears it. And do not go in the barn. I am going in the barn, and I am aware of what I am, and I have no answer for it except that she called me Sissy, and there is nobody else left alive who ever did. If I do not come back out, tell my brother in Owsley that and that is where it stops. Mid-sentence, at the bottom of a page, with the next page blank. There is no mark on that page, no blot, no struggle, no dragged pen. He simply stopped writing in the middle of a word to his brother, and closed the book, and put it in his coat, and went out. The name Silas Meek appears in the register of the Sizemore stand for the last time on the 11th of February, 1874. There is a mark beside it. Beside the mark, in that small, tight, unchanging hand, is the word kept. And his daybook was in the wall of the east room, behind a board that had been taken in and out so many times the nail holes had gone soft, which means Silas Meek did not hide it there once. It means he hid it there every night he stayed, and took it out again every morning. And it means that on the 11th of February, 1874, he put it in the wall and put the board back, and did not come back for it. He knew. He put it where the next man who could not sleep would find it. Let me stop there for a moment, because that is a clean place to stop, and because we are about halfway down into this. If you are still with me, and if this is the kind of case you want more of, told at this length, with the documents read out and the dates in order, the collection is called What the Hollows Keep. 10 of them, 9 hours. Link in the description and pinned in the comments. And tell me something while you are there. Tell me whether you would have opened the 3rd stall. Not what you should have done. What you would have done. At 2 in the morning, in February, with a bar and a lantern, and somebody who sounded like you're dead saying your name in the yard. I read the comments. I want to know how many of us there are. Now then. The morning of the 21st of October, 1883, Thomas Ellery Vance came down the stairs at first light with the daybook of Silas Meek in his coat, and his memorandum book in his pocket, and his money belt under his shirt. Wade Sizemore had done what he said he would do. The mule was fed. The crib door stood open. Nobody was in the kitchen. There was a plate on the table with cold biscuit and side meat on it and a cloth over it, which somebody had put there for him. He saddled his mare in the barn lot in the gray light, in the cold, with the frost thick, and he did not go into the barn to do it, because Wade had brought Peach out and tied her to the fence in the night. He rode out of the yard of the Sizemore stand at about 20 minutes past 6 on the morning of the 21st of October, 1883, and he turned down the fork toward Beaver Ford, toward Verna Blount's store, toward the county road and the world. He got 2 miles. Here is what happened, and I want to give it to you carefully, because it is the strangest single event in this entire case, and it is the one that people argue about. The Coldwater Fork Road crossed the creek 4 times between the stand and Beaver Ford. Vance had ridden it in, and had ridden the lower part of it 4 separate times that week, going out to buy stock, and he knew it the way you know a road you have been on 8 times. Not perfectly, but well enough. The first ford was about 1.25 miles below the stand. He crossed it. It was where it should be. The second ford was another 3/4 of a mile. He came down to it in the flat gray light and pulled up. The brush was uncut. I told you a long while back that the whole 11.5 miles of that road had been cleared back to a uniform distance on both sides, and that Ellery Vance had noticed the labor of it, and that Absalom Sizemore had laughed and said, "We like to see what is coming." At the second ford, on the morning of the 21st of October, the cut brush stopped, not tapered off, stopped across the road in a line, the way the tree line stops at the edge of a mowed pasture. On his side of the line, road. Beyond it, greenbrier and cane and second growth over the roadbed, thick as a hedge, with no gap in it that a horse could take. Grown. Not laid there. Grown, with 3-year canes in it and dead cane under the live cane and leaf mold around the stems. He sat his mare at the second ford of the Coldwater Fork and looked at 3 years of growth on a road he had ridden down 4 days earlier. He got off. He walked up to it. He put his hand in it. He got a thorn in the heel of his hand deep enough that it left a white scar he still had at 79, and which he would show to people, and which is the reason a Presbyterian minister took him seriously in 1928 when he might not have otherwise. He walked the mare into the creek and went 40 yards downstream to see if he could get around it in the water, and the cane came right down to the water on both banks and out into it. And while he was standing in that creek, up to his boot tops in it, with the mare's rein in his hand, something up on the right-hand ridge said, "Ellery." He did not answer. He led his mare back up out of the water and got on her, and he turned her, and he rode back up the fork the way he had come, and he did not go past the stand. At the stand he turned up. Verna Blount had said, "If a night comes on that road when you cannot keep hold of your own mind, go up the fork, not down it. At the head of the hollow there is an old woman named Oddie Redwine. Her door will open. Walk to it. Do not run to it." He rode. He would say later that he did not run and did not walk, and that he was aware the whole way up of trying to decide which one he was doing, and that the fact that he could not decide frightened him more than the cane had. The head of Coldwater Fork was 3.5 miles above the stand. The road got worse and then stopped being a road and became a track. He passed the Cobb place and 2 other houses, and one of them had a woman on the porch who watched him go by and did not answer when he raised his hand. Oddie Redwine's cabin sat at the very top of the hollow where the 2 ridges came together, on a bench of ground above a spring, with a rail fence around a dooryard and a great many gourds hung on poles for the martins, and it was the last building on the Coldwater Fork, and the road ended in her yard. She was 91 years old. She was sitting on the porch in the cold with a blanket over her knees, and Ellery Vance got down off his mare at the gate, and she said, before he had his hand on the latch, "You are the cattle man." He said he was. She said, "You have been down there 10 nights." He said he had. And Oddie Redwine said, "Then you can come in, and you can shut my door behind you, and you can put that mare in the lot with the gate shut, because it is a good mare, and it has done nothing to nobody." Oddie Redwine had lived at the head of Coldwater Fork for 61 years. She had not chosen the job she had. Her mother's sister, a woman named Phoebe Hollis, had had it before her, and had done it for 40-odd years, and had died in 1822, and Oddie had been 30 years old, and married with 2 children, and living 2 counties over, and had come back for the burying, and had not left. She was, in the language of that country and that century, a granny woman. She caught babies and set bones and knew the plants. That was the trade. The other thing was not a trade, and had no name, and she never gave it one. She said her aunt had told her, when she was a girl, somebody has got to sit at the top of it, and that was the whole of the instruction she ever got, and she had sat at the top of it for 6 decades. She fed him. That is the first thing she did. She put a plate in front of him and made him eat it before she would say a word about anything, and Ellery Vance, who had eaten 10 suppers at the Sizemore table, and every one of them good, said that a plate of beans and cold cornbread in Oddie Redwine's kitchen was the first food he had eaten in 10 days that had tasted like anything at all. Then she said, "Say it out," and he said it out. All of it. The barn, the warmth at the south end, the 3 sounds falling into one rhythm, the apple trees, the hats in the crib, the register and the mark and the word, the prints in the frost with the stride 11 inches longer, the voice in the yard, the cane at the second ford, and the daybook. He put Silas Meek's daybook on her table. Oddie Redwine put her hand flat on it and closed her eyes and sat there for a while. Then she said, "Silas Meek sat in that chair you are in the winter of '74. Sat there and told me he was going to go and look at it." Vance asked what she had said to him, and she said, "I told him it would be his own doing." And he said, "Yes, it would. And I give him his supper, and he went off down the hollow, and I have thought about him every winter since, and now here you sit with his book, and I find I am not surprised, and I am too old to be glad." Now, what Oddie Redwine told Thomas Ellery Vance in her kitchen on the morning of the 21st of October, 1883, is the closest thing to a cosmology this case has, and I am going to give it to you almost exactly as he set it down, because he set it down twice, 30 years apart, and the 2 versions match nearly word for word, which tells you what it did to him. She said, "Some ground is thick and some ground is thin. That is all it is. There is no more to it than that, and anybody that tells you more is selling you something. Most ground is thick. You can dig in it and build on it and bury in it, and it holds. Thick ground does not care about you, and that is a mercy, and you ought to be grateful for it every day of your life. Some ground is thin, not bad, thin. It is worn through, the way a knee goes in a breeches leg, and there is not enough of it between here and whatever is on the other side. There is thin ground all over this country. Most of it never comes to nothing, because there is nothing on the other side of it that wants anything. Thin ground with nothing behind it is just a place where the birds are quiet. That bottom is thin, and there is something behind it, and it wants. It has always been there. It was there when the Shawnee come through, and they knew it and did not camp on that bottom, and it was there before them. It did not come because Jephthah Sizemore called it. Jephthah Sizemore found a hole and looked in it, which is what a certain kind of man will always do, and it looked back, and they come to an arrangement. Vance asked her what the arrangement was, and Oddie Redwine said, "The same arrangement as ever. It keeps that bottom, and they feed it. She laid the Sizemore side of it out for him plainly, and this is the part that nobody expects, and it is the part that makes my skin move, because it is not a curse, it is an estate. She said, "You have been down there 10 days. Did you see a sick beast on that place?" He thought about it, and said he had not. She said, "Did you see the crop fail? Did you see a hail? Did you see a fence down? Do you know that the black diphtheria come up this fork in 1861 and took 11 children between the mouth and my house, and took none at that stand, and that there was 4 Sizemore children in that house at the time, and not one of them so much as coughed? It keeps that bottom. The weather goes around it. The sickness goes around it. That family has not had a bad year since 1852, and there is not another family on 11.5 miles of this creek that can say the same, and every one of them knows it, and that is why nobody up this hollow will say a word to a stranger, and why they all take Sizemore favors, and why Rufe Cobb sold you a mare and told you nothing. They are not in league. They are downstream. There is a difference, and it is not much of one, and I have not been able to get it any smaller in 61 years. Then she said the thing about the rent. She said, "It does not take many." That is how a thing like that lasts. A wolf on a range that takes every calf gets shot in a season. A thing that takes 1 traveler in 9 off a road that carries 40 a year on the far end of the poorest county in the state, that thing will run for 100 years, and no man will ever put a name to it. It is not restraint. It is not mercy. It is husbandry. Ellery Vance asked her the question you are asking. He asked her why nobody had ever burned the barn, and Oddie Redwine said, "The barn is not the thing. The barn is a lid." Jephthah Sizemore did not build a barn to keep something in. He built it to keep the weather off it. The same as you would build over a well. Burn the lid, and you have got a hole in a bottom with no lid on it, and 3 men who have got nothing left to lose, and a whole hollow of families who will hate you for the rest of your life for taking their good years off of them. And I will tell you the other thing, and you may believe it or not. My Aunt Phoeba told me that in her time, before the barn, before Jephthah, there was a woman on that bottom that had a cabin over that hole with a puncheon floor, and she is in the church ground at Beaver Ford, under a stone with no date on it, and there is a story in this hollow that is older than the Sizemores, and it is the same story with different names in it. The Sizemores are not the first tenants of that bottom, and they have not been there 31 year. They have been there 31 year this time. That is the deepest anybody ever got into it. That is the floor. There is no explanation under that one, and I am not going to invent you one. Then she gave him the rules. 3 of them, refined off Silas Meeks, and better. And she said the thing they all said, which by now you will have noticed. She said, 3 things, and then I have said it, and I will not say it again, because saying gives it a handhold, and I have got to sleep in this house after you are gone. 1. You count backward, out loud, from 100, not up. Meek counted up, and it worked, and it near killed him. Because a man counting up can go on forever, and does, and gets tired, and gets careless, and gets to 400, and does not know if he has said 380 already. Backward from 100 has a bottom to it. When you get to 0, you start again at 100. And if you ever lose your place, if you ever have to think about what comes next, you do not guess. You go back to 100 and start it clean. A guessed number is a copied number, and it will take it off you. 2. You keep your hand on iron the whole while, and it has got to be iron you brought in yourself, not a nail out of that house, not the latch, not their fire irons. A thing that come in from outside and has not been in that bottom long enough to be learned. A horseshoe in your coat, a knife. Your own gun barrel will do, and it is what most has used. 3, and this is the one that will save you or lose you. Do not say the name of your dead out loud on that ground. Not to me. I am at the head of the hollow, and this is my ground. And you may say it here if you want to. Down there, not once, not in prayer, not in temper, not in your sleep if you can help it. It has got her voice off you already. 10 nights it has been standing under your window learning. It has not got her name off you yet, because you have not said it, and I know you have not said it, because if you had said it, you would not be sitting in my kitchen this morning. You would be one of the 19, and I would hear about it in the spring. Ellery Vance said, and he was a plain man, and this is a plain question, he said, what does it do with them? And Oddie Redwine looked at him for a while. Then she said, you have been in that crib. You seen the hats. He said he had. She said, was there bones? He said there had not been. And she said, there is never bones. Not in 31 year. Not in Phoebe's time, neither. Sheriff Bledsoe come up here in 81 with 2 men and a dog, and went over that bottom and that barn and that sink mouth down at the lower end, and did not find so much as a button, and that is why there was never no charge brought, and never could be. I am going to tell you what I think, and I am going to be honest that it is what I think, and not what I know. I do not think it eats them. There is a difference between eat and keep, and that book on my table has the right word in it in the margin in that little hand, and the word is kept. A man goes down that hole, and the man is gone, and something down there knows how he laughed, and how he said his wife's name, and how he was wrong about a tune. That is what it takes. That is the rent. It does not want your meat, son. There is deer on that ridge. It wants the part of you that could be worn. And I think, and I will not say this twice, I think that is why it never gets it exactly right, because every one of them it took at the worst hour of their life, in the dark, frightened, calling out for somebody. That is all it has ever had to learn off of. It has had 90 men's last 10 minutes, and not one man's ordinary Tuesday. So it can do a voice, and it cannot do a person. It has never in its existence seen anybody happy. It does not know that a woman hums a tune wrong different every time, because it never heard nobody hum in a kitchen. It only ever heard them scream, and screaming is all one note. Ellery Vance sat in that kitchen at the head of Coldwater Fork, with his hands flat on the table, and thought about a laugh coming out of the dark with no joke in front of it. And he asked her one more thing. He asked about Rilla, and Oddie Redwine said, Rilla Vessels come up this fork in the spring of 1877 in a wagon with her husband and her husband's brother, going to Manchester, and lodged at the stand, and the husband and the brother is in that book with a mark by them, and she is not. She is 29 or 30 year old, and she has been in that house 6 year, and she has never come up this hollow to my door. And I have thought a long time about why, and there is only 2 reasons a body does not walk 3 mile to a open door. Either she cannot, or there is somebody in that house she will not leave. And Vance said, the woman upstairs. And Oddie Redwine said, ah, so you have heard the floor. He said he had. 2 steps and a wait. And Oddie Redwine, 91 years old, sitting at the head of the hollow where somebody had got to sit, said, Melindy Sizemore was buried at Beaver Ford in the church ground in 1868, and I helped wash her, and I helped dress her, and I stood at the hole. That is 15 year ago. There has been a plate carried up them stairs every day since. Ellery Vance slept that night at the head of Coldwater Fork, in Oddie Redwine's front room, on a corn shuck tick on the floor by the fire, and he slept 9 hours without moving, which he had not done in 10 days. Nothing came up that hollow. He asked her about it in the morning, and she said, it has been 61 year, and nothing has ever come in this dooryard, and I do not take one bit of credit for it. This is thick ground up here. That is all. My aunt did not pick this spot because she was wise. She picked it because it was the last piece of ground on this creek that would hold a house. Over breakfast she laid out his choices, and there were two. The first was the ridge. There was a footpath out of the head of the hollow, over the gap, and down the far side into Owsley County. 9 miles, on foot. He would have to leave the mare, and the mule, and the kit, and his saddle, and walk out with what was in his pockets, and he would be in Boonville by dark. She recommended it. She said it plainly and more than once. She said, 9 miles of walking and $100 of gear left behind is the cheapest anybody has ever got out of that bottom, and I have watched a good many try to get out cheaper. The second choice was to wait for the road, because the road, she said, would open again, she said. It is holding the road because it is not done. It will not hold it forever. It cannot. There is a mail rider comes up that fork once a month, and there is a preacher comes up in the spring, and there is families up this hollow that has got to get down to Beaver Ford to sell and to bury and to marry, and if that road stayed shut a month, there would be men from the county up here with axes asking questions, and it has run 31 years by never once making anybody ask a question. So it will open. It might be open this morning. It might be open Friday. It will open when it is done with you, one way or the other. And Ellery Vance asked her the question that decided the rest of his life. He said, "And Rilla?" And Audie Redwine put down what she was holding. She said, "You cannot carry a woman out over that gap that does not want to go." He said, "Have you ever asked her?" And the old woman was quiet a while, and then she said, "No, because in 61 years I have learned what I can do and what I cannot, and I sit at the top of this hollow, and I keep a door that opens, and I do not go down it. If I go down it, I am one more, and then there is nobody at the top. That is not courage, son. I want you to hear me. That is not courage, and I have never once called it courage. It is arithmetic, and I have done it every morning for 6 decades, and I have got the same answer every morning, and I do not like it any better now than I did the first time." Thomas Ellery Vance walked out of that dooryard at about 8:30 on the morning of the 22nd of October, 1883, and got on his mare and rode back down the Coldwater Fork toward the Sizemore stand. I want to be careful about how I say this next part, because it would be easy to make him into something he was not. He was not a brave man in any way that he ever recognized. He said so, repeatedly, to everybody who ever asked him. He said he had been frightened continuously from the 18th of October to the 24th, and that the fear never once let up or leveled off. He was not going down that hollow with a plan. He had no plan. He had a pistol he had never fired at anything but a stump, $410, and Silas Meek's daybook in his coat. What he had, and what Silas Meek did not have, is the thing I want you to notice, because it is the whole difference between the man who came out and the man who did not. Silas Meek went back down that hollow 11 times for the dead. Ellery Vance went back down it once, for somebody living. That is not a moral. It is closer to a mechanism. Whatever was in that barn had spent 31 years perfecting a hook baited with grief. And grief pulls a man inward, down, toward the hole, toward the voice. It had never in its existence had to deal with a man who was walking toward the bottom for a reason that had nothing to do with what it was holding. It did not know what to do with that. And you will see in about 40 minutes exactly where it did not know what to do with that. He rode into the yard at 9:15. Absalom Sizemore was on the porch, and Ellery Vance, who had spent 15 years reading men across a fence rail with money in his hand, said that the look on Absalom Sizemore's face when he rode back into that yard was the first genuinely honest expression he had seen on it in 11 days. It was relief. Absalom came down off the porch with his hands up and open in that way he had, and said, "Well now, we had you gone. Vance said the road was blocked at the second ford, and Absalom Sizemore said, "It does that." 2 words. "It does that?" Said the way a man says the chimney smokes when the wind is out of the north. 31 years of it, and the road going shut was a household inconvenience with a plural pronoun in front of it that he did not bother to define. Then Absalom said, "You went up the hollow." Vance said he had. To Otti, Vance said yes. And Absalom Sizemore nodded and looked off at the ridge for a second and said the most chilling thing anybody said to Ellery Vance in that entire fortnight, and he said it kindly. He said, "She is a good old woman, and she has told you the truth. I want you to know I have got no quarrel with her, and never have. She has said her piece to a good many, and it has never yet changed nothing, and it will not change nothing now. And I do not hold it against her, because somebody has got to sit at the top of it. Somebody has got to sit at the top of it." The exact phrase her Aunt Faber gave her in 1822. They knew. Both ends of that hollow knew, and had known for 60 years, and had arrived at an understanding, and the understanding was that she would keep a door open at the top, and they would keep a house open at the bottom, and neither of them would ever once speak of it to the county. Vance said he would stay until the road opened. Absalom said, "It will open. It generally does." And then he said, 40 cents, same as before. And Thomas Ellery Vance paid a man 40 cents to sleep in his house. He got 2 things done that day. The first was Rilla, and I am going to give you the whole of it, because it is, to my mind, the true center of this case, and everything else, the barn, the sink, the marked circle down at the lower end that I am going to show you in about half an hour, is furniture around it. He got her alone at about 2 in the afternoon at the spring house. Absalom was up the hollow. Ephraim was at the barn. Wade was gone somewhere, and had been gone since morning. Vance came down to the spring house with a bucket he did not need, and he said, straight out, with no preamble at all, because he had worked out he would have 90 seconds and no more. "There is a footpath over the gap at the head of the hollow. 9 miles. Otti Redwine will put you on it. I will walk it with you. We can be in Boonville by dark, and I will pay your way anywhere from there and never see you again." Rilla Vessels stood in the door of that spring house with a crock in her hands. She said, "No." He said, "Ma'am?" And she said, "You do not know what you are asking, and you are going to feel very fine about yourself for asking it, and then you are going to leave, so I am going to tell you the whole of it in one go, and then I am going to carry this in, and you are not going to speak to me again." And this is what she said. He wrote it down that night. It is in the back of his memorandum book in pencil, running sideways across 2 pages of cattle purchases, and the page is legible, and it has been photographed, and I have read it, and this is what it says. She said, "I come up this fork in April of 77 with my husband, Lowell Vessels, and his brother Amos. We was going to Manchester. We stopped here one night. I have been here 6 year and 4 month. They went out to the barn on the second morning and did not come back. And Absalom Sizemore sat me down in that kitchen and told me my husband had took the wagon and gone on and left me. And I knew it was a lie while he was saying it, and he knew I knew, and he said it anyway. And that is the only lie any of them has ever told me in 6 year. They have told me the truth ever since, and it has been worse. Now here is why I will not walk over your gap. There is a room at the top of them stairs. There is something in it. They call it Mother. Absalom carries no plate up, and Ephraim carries no plate up, and Wade will not go past the 6th step. I carry it up. 3 times a day for 6 year, near enough 4,000 times, I have carried a plate up them stairs and set it down on the boards outside that door and knocked twice and come back down, and it talks to me through the door, and it talks to me in Lowell's voice. Ellery Vance stood in a springhouse door in Tallow County, Kentucky, and did not say anything at all. She said, "It is not him. I have known it was not him since the 2nd month. It says the same things. It says a thing he said to me at the ford the day we come up, and it has said it now maybe 400 times, the same words at the same speed, and a man does not say a thing 400 times the same. I know what it is. I have had 6 years to know what it is, and I am not stupid, and I am not mad, and every day I go up them stairs. You are going to say that is the trap. I know it is the trap. That is not a thing you can tell me that I have not said to myself in the dark for 6 years. I want you to understand what you are offering me. You are offering me a 9-mile walk to a place where nothing has his voice in it. He has been dead 6 years. He was 31. He was not a good man in any large way. He drank, and he was hard with a horse, and he could not keep money. And he is the only person that ever in my life come and got me when I was sick. And I have got, in the whole world, one thing left of him, and it is behind a door at the top of them stairs, and it is a lie, and it says his words in his voice, and if I walk over your gap into Owsley County, I will never hear it again as long as I live. So no, not today. Ask me again in 10 years, and I might have got tired enough. But you will not be here in 10 years, and I will." She picked up the crock and went past him into the yard. And at the corner of the springhouse, she stopped and said one more thing without turning around, and it is the thing that got him out alive on the night of the 23rd, and she did not have to say it, and she did. She said, "They have marked you. Absalom put the mark by your name on the 11th, the first night, before you had your boots off, and it has been changed since, and I have looked at it, and I do not know what it means, and I do not want to. And Wade has not carried one yet. He is 22. Ephraim carried his first at 19, and Absalom at 17, and their daddy would not have a man in this house that had not. They are going to make him carry you. It has been coming since the summer. That is what they was arguing about at the crib on Tuesday. Now, Carrie, you have heard that word 3 times now, and I have not explained it, and I have let you sit with it, and here is what it means, and Oddie Redwine confirmed it to Vance the following year in a letter that a neighbor wrote out for her, so it is not a guess. The tenant did not come out and take men. It could come up out of the barn into the yard. The prints in the frost say so. The voice at the window says so. But in 31 years there is not one account, not one, of anybody being taken out of the house, or off the road, or out of a bed. It called. That is all it did. It called in a voice you would open a door for, and it waited to see if you would come. Most did not come. That is the arithmetic of 1 in 9. Most travelers heard nothing at all, because most travelers had nothing worth wearing yet, and slept sound, and ate their breakfast, and rode on, and their names have no mark beside them. A good many heard something, and did not answer, and left in the morning shaken, and told the story for years to people who did not believe them. But some came. Some got up out of that bed at 2 in the morning and went down the stairs and out the kitchen door and across 80 yards of mowed yard toward a voice. And a man walking across a dark yard toward a barred barn door cannot get in. So somebody had to open it. Carrying was not carrying a body. Carrying was walking out ahead of a man with a lantern and lifting the bar and standing aside. That is the family trade. That is what Jephthah Sizemore taught 3 sons. That is what a 10-year-old boy who could not read was going to be taught when he was old enough, and why a peddler sold his father a testament at cost in 1871, and why the same boy at 22 stood in a barn lot and said, "I have not carried one yet to a stranger," out loud, on purpose, because he wanted one person on this earth to have heard him say it while it was still true. And Verna Blount had told Ellery Vance in a store in Beaver Ford 11 days earlier, Do not let any man of that family carry your lamp into that barn ahead of you." She knew the word. She had known the word for years. She used it to a stranger's face, and he heard it as ordinary English and rode on down the fork. That was the second thing Ellery Vance did on the 22nd of October. He went down to the lower end of the bottom, in the middle of the afternoon, in full sunlight, alone, and looked at the sink. The cold water bottom ran about 40 acres, with the house and barn on the upper half, and the creek along the west edge. At the lower end, where the ridges came back in, the ground fell off into a wooded pocket of maybe 3 acres that had never been cleared. The creek went into it and did not come out. It went under, into the limestone, the way creeks do all over that country, and came out again 3 miles down as a big blue spring in another hollow entirely. He went in along the water. It was hard-going cane and rhododendron and blowdown, and it took him the better part of 40 minutes to make 300 yards. He found 3 things in there, and I am going to give them to you in the order he found them. The first was the iron. About 150 yards in, he came out of the cane into an opening in the timber, maybe 40 feet across. That was not a natural opening. It was too round. And around the edge of it, driven into the ground, was iron. Horseshoes mostly, hundreds of them, driven point down into the sod at intervals of a foot or so, in a ring all the way around. And not only horseshoes wagon tire, cut into lengths and driven in, plow points, broken hoe blades, a section of chain staked at both ends, bar iron. Old iron and new iron together. The oldest of it was not there any more in any way you could pick up. It was rust-colored stain in the sod, and a hard place under the grass where your boot heel rang. The newest of it was bright at the edges, and had been driven that year. Somebody had been maintaining a ring of iron around that opening for a very long time, and somebody was still maintaining it. Oddie Redwine had told him that morning, "Keep your hand on iron, and it has got to be iron you brought in yourself that has not been in that bottom long enough to be learned." Somebody 100 years before Oddie Redwine had known the same thing, and had known it well enough to spend a century's worth of iron on it. Now here is the detail that made Thomas Ellery Vance sit down on a log in the middle of that opening at 3 in the afternoon and put his head in his hands. On the north side of the ring, the side toward the barn, a section about 11 feet long had been pulled up. Not rusted out, not grown over, pulled. The horseshoes were lying in a heap in the leaves beside their own holes, and the holes were open, and the earth in them was fresh enough to be dark, and the heap had a couple of seasons of leaf litter on top of it, and no more. 2 years, maybe 3. Somebody had spent 100 years fencing that thing in with iron, and in the last 2 or 3 years somebody had gone down there and taken a gap out of the fence on the side facing the barn. The second thing he found was the mouth. In the center of the ring, the ground went down into a bowl about 15 feet across, and at the bottom of the bowl was the sink, an opening in the limestone that he estimated at 8 feet by 5, going down at a steep angle into the dark, with the creek running into it along the left-hand side and dropping out of sight. He did not go down into it. I want to be clear that he never went into that hole, and never saw anything in it, and neither did anybody else who lived. He lay down on his belly at the lip of it in the afternoon sun and looked in, and what he reported is this. He could see perhaps 20 feet, and the passage widened, and the floor of it went out of sight to the left, and there was a smell coming up out of it, the smell of the inside of a well, and cold coins, exactly the same as the runway of the barn on his first night, which told him what he had already worked out, which is that the third stall and this hole were the same room with a barn built over one end of it, and the air coming up out of it was warm. Roof Cobb had told Silas Meek that his uncle carried him there as a boy, and that the air came up out of it warm in winter. That was somewhere around 1820. 60 years later, it was still warm, in October, coming up out of a hole in the ground in a country where every other cave mouth in the county blows a steady 54 degrees year-round. The third thing he found was the cabin. Coming back out, he took a line up the slope rather than along the creek to save the cane, and about 80 yards above the sink, on a bench of level ground in old timber, he walked into a foundation, 4 courses of dry-laid stone, roughly 16 feet by 20. A hearth at the east end, still standing 4 feet high, with the fireback stones burned red. Trees growing inside the walls, one poplar he put at better than 100 years old, standing where the floor had been, and a puncheon floor. Or what was left of one. Black rotted slabs of split log lying in the leaf mold inside the foundation, the flat sides up, laid the way a puncheon floor is laid, Otti Redwine, that morning, telling him what her Aunt Phoeba had told her. There was a woman on that bottom that had a cabin over that hole with a puncheon floor, and she is in the church ground at Beaver Ford, under a stone with no date on it. He went to the hearth. And on the underside of the mantel stone, on the face that a person would only see if they were sitting on the hearth looking up, somebody had cut letters and numbers with a chisel. They were worn and they were mossed, and he cleaned them with his thumb and the heel of his hand for about 10 minutes. What he got was this: a name that was gone except for the last 4 letters, and those were E-S-T-E-R, and under it, a date. And the date was complete, and the date was 1791. 1791. Jephthah Sizemore built his barn in 1852. He was, at the outside, the 3rd tenant of that bottom. There had been somebody living directly over that hole, with a floor of split logs 61 years before he ever laid a sill, and that somebody had cut her name and a date into the underside of her own mantle where nobody would see it, which is not a thing you do to be remembered. It is a thing you do to leave a marker. And there is a stone with no date on it in the church ground at Beaver Ford, which is 11.5 miles away, which means somebody carried her out of that hollow. Ellery Vance walked back up the bottom to the Sizemore stand in the last of the light on the 22nd of October, 1883, and Ephraim Sizemore was standing at the corner of the barn watching him come out of the lower woods, and had, Vance was quite certain, been standing there the entire time. Let me pause for one line, because I know some of you have been sitting in the dark with me for a long while now. If you are still here this deep in drop, a single word in the comments: iron. That is all. I want to see how many of us made it to the ring now. The night of the 22nd of October, 1883, he went up to the east room at 8:30. He did not undress. He put the chair under the latch, which he now understood to be a gesture and nothing else. He put the pistol on the bed beside his right hand, a Colt in .44, a heavy iron thing that had come with him from Bourbon County and had never been in that bottom before the 11th. Iron he brought in himself. He had understood the rule, and he had made his arrangements, and he sat up against the headboard in the dark with his hand on that gun barrel, and waited, and he had a fair idea of what was coming, and he was wrong about the shape of it, because up to that night every single thing that had happened to him had happened outside. At about 11 the creek stopped. At about 10 past, the guineas went up and were cut off. And at about 11:15, Thomas Ellery Vance heard the kitchen door open downstairs and close. And then he heard the stairs. I need you to understand the geometry of that house, because it matters. The stairs came up out of the kitchen along the north wall to a small landing. Off the landing there were 3 doors. The east room, where Vance was, the west room, where Absalom and Wade slept, and the front room over the kitchen, at the head of the stairs, which was where the plate went. Something came up those stairs, 1 tread at a time. It did not creep. Vance was very clear on that. It came up at an ordinary domestic pace, the pace of a person going up to bed, and it put weight on every tread, and the treads answered the way treads do. It got to the landing, and then it stood there. He said it stood on that landing for what he believed was close to an hour, and that he could not swear to the hour, because he was not looking at a watch, and could not have read one, but that it was a very long time, and that in the whole of it there was no sound whatever from the west room, where 2 men were sleeping 12 feet away. They were not sleeping. He knew that then, and said so. 2 men lay in the dark, 12 feet from that landing, with their eyes open, and did not make a sound, because this was the 22nd of October, and it was Tuesday, and this was a thing that happened in their house. Then it knocked. 2 knocks. On the door of the east room, not loud. The 2 polite knocks of somebody who does not want to wake the house. And Ellery Vance, sitting in the dark with his hand on a gun barrel, felt every hair on his body stand up, because the knock was not a knock. It was a thumbnail. 2 taps of a thumbnail on a wooden panel at exactly the spacing that Cordelia Vance had tapped her thumbnail twice against the rim of a cup before she drank, every time, for 5 years, without knowing she did it. Now here is the part that he did not tell anybody for 40 years, and when he finally told it to the minister Coyle in 1928, Coyle wrote in his own account that Vance stopped 3 times getting it out. He said, "It did not learn that off her. She was dead 4 years before that thing ever heard of me. It never heard her. It has never in its life heard my wife do anything. It learned it off me. Because I do it. I have done it since about a year after she died, and I did not know I did it until a woman at a boarding house in Winchester asked me why I always knocked on my cup, and I could not answer her, and I went out and sat in the road. I had been 11 days in that house, drinking coffee at that table 3 times a day and tapping my thumbnail on the cup like she did, and something had been watching, and it had took it off me and give it back through a door at midnight. That is what I could not carry, Reverend. Not the voice. The voice I was ready for. It had been at the window 4 nights, and I had it worked out. But there was nothing left of her on this earth except a few little habits that had got into me without me knowing, and it went in and got one of them, and I understood in that half-second what I had actually been doing for 4 years, which was carrying her about with me in pieces I did not even know I had. And that thing knew where every one of them was, and it was going to ask for them one at a time. Then the voice on the landing said, "Ellery." He started counting, out loud, backward, from 100, the way Oddie Redwine had told him 11 hours earlier at a kitchen table 3.5 miles up the hollow, with his right hand flat on the iron barrel of a .44 Colt that had come in from Bourbon County. 100. 99. 98. And the thing on the other side of that door went to work on him. And it worked on him for somewhere between 3 and 4 hours, and it never once said a number. It said his name in the gaps. It hummed the same tune, off by the same amount, over and over. It said, "I am cold out here," which was the same sentence it had used at the window on the 18th. And he noticed that, and noticing it steadied him, because a living woman does not use the same sentence twice in 4 days. At about 80 it said, "Ellery, open the door." At about 70 it started saying things that were harder. It said the name of the street in Paris, Kentucky. It said the word typhoid. It said, "You left the window open," which was true, and which was a thing that he had privately, stupidly, sinfully blamed himself for since October of 1879, and had never said out loud to one living soul. He did not know how it had that. He never found out. And he said that at the time it did not even frighten him, because he had gone somewhere past frightened, into a flat, cold place where there was nothing in the world but the next number. 69, 68, 67, and at some point between 60 and 55, it laughed. That laugh again, all in one breath, with the whole chest, with no joke in front of it. And Ellery Vance lost his place. He had been counting for well over an hour. His mouth was dry and his tongue had gone thick, and he had stopped hearing his own voice as words. And the laugh went through him, and there was a gap, and he came up out of it and did not know what he had last said. And he guessed. He said, 58. And from the other side of the door, immediately, in Delia's voice, the thing said, 58. Oddie Redwine. A guest number is a copied number, and it will take it off you. He had handed it 1. He had reached back for a number instead of making one, and a number that is remembered is a number that can be copied, and the instant it had one, it was in through the gap with it. And then it said, 57, and it said, 56, and it began to count down on the other side of that door, in his dead wife's voice, at his own speed, taking the count off him the way it had taken the 23rd Psalm off Silas Meek in 1873. And Thomas Ellery Vance said that this was the only moment in 11 days, and the only moment in 51 subsequent years, when he came genuinely close to opening a door, and that the reason was not that he wanted to, and not that he was fooled. It was that it was counting for him, and he was so tired, and he had been counting for an hour and a half, and there was a thing on the other side of the door doing the work now. He said, I have thought about that for 50 years, and I will tell you exactly what it felt like. It felt like somebody taking a weight out of your hands. He got his hand tighter on the gun barrel. He said the iron was cold, and that the cold of it was the thing that got through, and he did what she had told him to do, and it is a very small thing, and it saved his life. He went back to 100. Clean, from the top, out loud. 100, 99, 98, at a fresh pace, in a voice that had gone to pieces. And the thing on the other side of the door was at 54, and it did not follow him. It could not. It had one thread, and he had dropped it and started another one, and it went on counting down alone on the wrong count, in a dead woman's voice, all the way to naught. And when it got to naught, it stopped, and it said his name once more, and then there was nothing on that landing at all. He counted until the window went gray. He was, by his own estimate, on his 4th or 5th pass down from 100 when he realized the creek had been running for some time. At full daylight he came out of the east room, and there were no marks on the door and nothing in the hall. And at the head of the stairs, outside the front room door, there was a plate from the night before with the food gone off it, and Rilla Vessels was on her knees on the landing boards, scrubbing at something on the floor with a rag and a bucket. And she did not look up at him, and she did not stop, and he went by her and down the stairs. He never learned what she was scrubbing. He asked her nothing, and of all the things in 11 days that he could not put down, he said that this was the one that came back most often in his old age, a woman on her knees in a hallway at first light, cleaning up after it, the way you clean up after a dog. Downstairs, Absalom Sizemore was at the table with his coffee. He looked at Ellery Vance's face, and he said, "You did not sleep." And Vance said, "No." And Absalom Sizemore said, "You counted." Not a question. He said it the way a man says, "You took the north road." And then he said, "Oddie give you that. She has give it to 4 or 5 over the years." He turned his cup on the table. "It works. I will not tell you it does not. And I will tell you what she likely did not, being an old woman and kind in her way. It works tonight. You will do it again tonight, and it will work again. And tomorrow. And a man can go a good while. Meek went a year and a half. And every night it is a little harder to get to naught. And every night it has got a little more of you to say through the door. And one night your voice gives out. Or you take a fever. Or you get to 58 and you guess. You cannot count for the rest of your life, Mr. Vance. That is all I am telling you. There is not a man born that can count for the rest of his life. And Ellery Vance, standing in that kitchen in the daylight with his hands shaking so badly he had to put them behind him, asked Absalom Sizemore the only question he ever asked him, straight. He said, "Why do you do it?" And the eldest Sizemore brother, who was kind, and who told good stories about mules, and who had done this 90 times, looked up at him and gave an answer that Vance said he could see the man had prepared a long time ago and had never had occasion to use. He said, "My daddy give it to me, and I will give it to my brother's boy, if Wade ever gets one, and if he does not, it will stop with us, and this hollow will go back to being what every other hollow in this county is, which is poor. I have got 4 families up this fork that has buried no children since 1852. 4. You go up there and you count the stones at Beaver Ford, and then you count the stones on this fork, and you come back and tell me the number, and then you ask me your question again. I am not asking you to think well of me. I have not thought well of me since I was 17 years old, and my daddy handed me a lantern, and we walked out to that barn. I am telling you that there is a price on this ground, and it has been paid by somebody every one of 31 year, and the ones paying it is strangers, and the ones getting it is my people, and I know precisely what that makes me, and I have made my peace with it, and I sleep, sir. I do sleep. That is the part you will want to know, and I will tell you plain. I sleep like a stone." And then he said, "Wade will not, though. Wade has got it in him to not sleep. That is why it has to be soon." He set it into his coffee. He may not even have meant Vance to hear it. That was the morning of the 23rd of October, 1883, and that night was the night it almost happened. There were 4 things different about the Sizemore stand on the evening of the 23rd of October, 1883, and Thomas Ellery Vance noticed all 4 of them between 4 in the afternoon and dark, and every one of them told him the same thing. The first was his mare. He had put Peach in the first stall on the left every night for 12 nights, himself, with his own hands, and Wade had brought her out to the fence for him on the morning of the 21st. At about 4:30 that afternoon, he went out to look at her, and she was not in the first stall on the left. She was in the 4th stall, at the south end of the runway, in the warm. Somebody had moved her while he was at the house. Her manger was full, and she had not touched it, and she was standing with her weight back off her front feet and her ears forward, the way she had stood on the first night, and when he came down the runway to her, she made a sound he had never heard her make in 6 years of owning her. He moved her back up to the first stall himself and did not say a word to anybody about it. The second was the crib. The corn crib had stood open every day he had been there. That afternoon it was shut, and the hasp was through, and there was a peg in the hasp. He did not lift it. He had no need to. He knew what was on the back wall of it, and he knew that a man does not shut a door on 17 hats unless he expects to be adding to the row. The third was Ephraim. At about 5:45, in the last of the light, Ephraim Sizemore walked from the spring house to the barn, carrying 2 lanterns, 2, one in each hand. He had carried 1 lantern to that barn every evening for 12 evenings. And the 4th was supper. Supper, on the 23rd of October, was the best meal served at the Sizemore stand in the whole of the time Ellery Vance was under that roof, and by a distance there was a chicken killed that afternoon. There was a pie. There were the dried apples, stewed with sugar, that he had said, on the first night, out loud, at that table, were the best he had ever eaten, and had not been served since, and were served that night in a bowl set down in front of his place and nobody else's. Absalom Sizemore was warm and easy and funny for 2 solid hours. He told the story about the mule that could open a gate latch with its lip, which he had told on the first night, and he told it better the second time, and Ellery Vance sat at that table and ate a chicken and laughed in the right places and understood exactly what was being done to him. He was being sent off. That table had 31 years of practice at it. Wade Sizemore came in at dark and sat down and ate nothing. He was 22 years old, and he sat at his brother's table with his hands in his lap, and did not lift a fork one time, and Absalom looked at him twice, and said nothing. And Rilla Vessels came and went with dishes, and did not raise her eyes off the floor the entire evening. Vance said good night at 8:30. Absalom Sizemore stood up when he did. That was new. And he said, "Sleep well, Mr. Vance." And Vance said he expected he would. And Absalom said, and this is the last sentence Absalom Sizemore ever said to him, he said, "It is a kindness of you to say so." He went up to the east room and put the chair under the latch and sat down on the bed with his back to the headboard and his right hand on the barrel of a .44 Colt. And he started counting at about 8:45 before there was anything to count against, because he had worked out that a man who begins the count early begins it with a full voice. 100, 99, 98. And at some point past 10 he heard the kitchen door open and close, and he heard, out in the yard, 2 men's voices, and one of them was raised. He could not make out words. He got up and went to the window with the count still going, and looked down, and there was nothing to see. And the voices were around at the front, on the porch side. It went on for a good while, and then it stopped. And the kitchen door opened and closed again, and the house was still. The creek stopped at about 11. He counted. 82, 81, 80. The guineas went up and were cut off. 76, 75. And then he heard the stairs, and something came up them at an ordinary domestic pace, putting its weight on every tread, and stopped on the landing. 68, 67, 66, and he did the whole of it again, and it was worse than the night before, because it had another day's worth of him. It said the street in Paris. It said typhoid. It said you left the window open. It hummed. It said his name in the gaps. And then, at somewhere around 40, it said a thing it had not said before. It said, in Delia's voice, perfectly conversational, through a plank door at midnight, "Ellery, put down the gun and come out. You are being so silly. You are being so silly." 5 words, in the exact cadence of a woman who used to say them to a man who checked the stove twice. He counted. 39, 38. He got to 0. He went back to 100, clean, out loud. He was somewhere in his second pass, down around the 60s, when the thing on the landing stopped talking and went away down the stairs. And he counted for a while into the silence, and then he stopped, and the house was quiet, and the creek was running. And he thought, and this is his own account, and it is one of the few funny things in this whole case, if you have a certain turn of mind, he thought, well, that was easier than last night. And then somebody knocked on the door. 2 knocks. Knuckles. A fist. And Ellery Vance's hand closed on that gun barrel so hard he could not open it afterward without using the other hand, because he had made a rule for himself at the beginning of the evening, and the rule was that he was not going to answer that door for anything, and here it was at midnight, knocking with knuckles like a person. A voice said, "Mr. Vance." He did not answer. The voice said, "It is Wade, Mr. Vance. The road is open." And now I want you to appreciate the problem, because it is the exact problem this entire case is built on, and this is the moment the whole thing turns. He had 11 days of evidence that whatever was in that hollow could copy any voice it had heard. It had heard Wade Sizemore's voice every day of Wade Sizemore's life. He had a wooden door, a gun, and no way on this earth to tell. And then he remembered Silas Meek, in a peddler's daybook, in a wall 6 inches from his shoulder. In 1873, "It cannot make anything new." And Ellery Vance said, through the door, in a voice he described as sounding like somebody else's, "Tell me a thing I have never heard in this house." There was a pause on the other side of the door, and then Wade Sizemore said, "In 1871, a peddler sold my daddy a testament at cost because I was 10 and could not read. My daddy give it to me and never asked after it again. I taught myself out of it over 4 years with nobody helping, and I done it in the loft of that barn, because there was no other place a body is let alone here. I can read now. I have never told nobody in my life that I can read, and Absalom does not know it, and it is the only thing I have got that is mine. Nothing in that hollow had ever heard that. Nobody had. It had never been said out loud by anybody anywhere in 12 years. A thing that can only copy cannot say a sentence that has never been said. Ellery Vance took the chair out from under the latch and opened the door. Wade Sizemore was on the landing, with a lantern in his hand, and his coat on, and his hat on, he said. The road opened at dusk. I walked down and looked at it myself. The cane is gone at the second ford. Not cut. Gone. There is bare road where it was, and there is no cut cane laying anywhere, and I have been down there with a light and looked in the brush on both sides, and there is nothing. Your mare is saddled and tied at the lot gate, and your mule is loaded, and I done it an hour ago while they was on the porch. I am going to walk out ahead of you with this lantern all the way to Beaver Ford, and you are going to come behind me, and you are going to count out loud the whole 11 miles and a half, and you are not going to stop counting if I speak to you, and you are not going to stop counting if it speaks to you, and if you lose it, I will pick it up and carry it till you get a hold of it again. And Ellery Vance looked at that boy standing on that landing with a lantern in his hand, walking out ahead of a man, and understood what he was being offered. He said, "Wade, if you take me down that road, they will know what you are." And Wade Sizemore said, "They know what I am. I have knowed what I am since I was 10-year-old and could not read. It is them that has been waiting to find out." They went down the stairs. Rilla Vessels was standing at the bottom of them in the dark kitchen, with no lamp lit. She had been standing there some time. She had a shawl on, and she had in her hand a leaf of paper folded twice, and she put it into Ellery Vance's hand as he came past her, and she closed his fingers on it. It was a leaf, torn out of the register of the Sizemore stand. October of 1883, 4 entries. A tinware peddler, a man and his son, a woman with a hired driver, and thaws. E. Vance, Bourbon Co., dated the 11th with a mark beside it, and a word in the margin, and under the word a place where the paper had been rubbed thin. She had gone into that front room and torn it out of the book. Wade said, "Lo, Rilla, come on." And Rilla Vessels said, "No." And Wade Sizemore said, "Rilla." And she said, "Not tonight, Wade." And then she said, "Go on. He is on the porch and F is at the barn, and you have got about 4 minutes." Ellery Vance said the last he saw of her was a woman standing in a dark kitchen, holding a shawl closed at her throat, and that she said one more thing to him, and that she said it in an ordinary voice, the way you say a thing to somebody who is going out. She said, "Tell Ottie Redwine I know her door opens." They went out the kitchen door into the yard. Absalom Sizemore was on the porch. They had to go by the end of it to get to the lot gate, 30 feet from where he was sitting, and there was a moon that night, and he saw them, and Ellery Vance stopped, because there was nothing else to do. Wade did not stop. Wade walked out into the middle of that yard with the lantern held up at the height of his shoulder and stood there so that his brother could see him plain, and he did not say one word. And Absalom Sizemore sat on that porch and looked at his youngest brother, standing in a yard at midnight, with a lit lantern held up, walking ahead of a marked man in the wrong direction. And Vance said that the old man made a sound. He would not ever describe it further than that. He said it was a sound, and that he had heard it made once before by a man at a stockyard who had been told something about his son. And then Absalom Sizemore said, quite clearly, across 30 feet of moonlit yard, "Then it will want somebody tonight." And Wade Sizemore said, "I know it." And his brother said, "Go on then." That is the whole of it. That is everything that was said. 2 sentences and 3 words. And a man let his brother go, and I have turned that exchange over for a long time. and I am not certain to this day whether Absalom Sizemore was giving up or giving in, or doing the only decent thing he ever did in his life at 11 o'clock at night after doing the other thing 90 times. They went out the lot gate at about 20 past 11 on the night of the 23rd of October, 1883, and Ellery Vance began to count. 11.5 miles is a long way at night on foot and horseback in October. It took them a little under 5 hours. Wade Sizemore walked the whole of it, ahead, with the lantern up. Vance rode behind him at a walk with the mule on a lead, and his right hand on the iron of the gun barrel, and his voice going out loud, 100, 99, 98, down to naught, and back to 100, over and over, for 4 hours and 40 minutes. He estimated afterward, and I have checked his arithmetic, that he counted from 100 down to naught, somewhere between 50 and 60 times on that road. Here is what happened on the way out. I am going to give it to you in the order it happened, and I am going to keep it short, because it was short, and because the horror of that ride is not in any single event in it. It is in the duration. At the first ford, nothing. Between the first ford and the second, at about 1.75 miles, something came into the timber on the right-hand side and paced them. It stayed off the road. It stayed level with the lantern. It made no attempt to conceal itself, and no attempt to be seen. It went through cane and blowdown and greenbrier at the speed of a walking horse, on a hillside, at night, without a light, and it did not once break stride, and it did not once make the sound that a body makes going through cane. It made a different sound. Vance said it sounded like a hand going along a wall in the dark. At the second ford, the cane was gone. Wade held the lantern down over the roadbed, and there was bare packed road where, on the morning of the 22nd, Ellery Vance had put his hand into 3 years of growth and taken a thorn deep enough to scar. There was no cut cane in the ditches. There was no drag mark. The road was simply road. Vance did not stop counting. He got down off the mare and led her across the ford and got back on. 62, 61, 60. Between the second and third fords, it said his name 11 times from the right-hand timber, and Wade Sizemore never once turned his head. At the third ford, it got in front of them. Vance said this was the worst of it, and it lasted about 90 seconds. Something was standing in the road on the far side of the third ford, at the edge of the lantern light, 60 or 70 feet off. It was upright. He could not see it in any detail, and he was careful all his life not to claim that he could. He said it was the height of a tall man, and that the proportion of it was wrong, in a way he could not put a word to for 50 years, and eventually put this word to unfinished. He said, it was like a shape somebody had made out of a description. Wade Sizemore did not stop, and did not slow down, and did not raise the lantern. He walked straight at it with the light held at his shoulder, and Ellery Vance rode after him, counting 44, 43, 42, 41, and at about 30 feet the thing in the road stepped aside into the water and stood in the creek and let them go by. And Vance said that he did not look at it as he passed, and that Wade did not either, and that as they came level with it, it hummed, once, 4 or 5 notes, off-key, by the exact same amount. Between the third and fourth fords, Ellery Vance's voice gave out. He had been counting for something over 3 hours. He got down into the 20s, and the words stopped coming, and he made a sound that was not a number, and he lost his place entirely. And Wade Sizemore, walking ahead of him in the dark with a lantern, said, 19, and Vance got a breath and said, 18, and Wade said, 17, and the two of them counted that stretch together, turn and turn about. And Ellery Vance said that at some point in those minutes he began to cry and went on counting while he did it, and that he was not ashamed of it and never had been. They came into Beaver Ford at about 10 minutes past 4 in the morning on the 24th of October, 1883. Verna Blount's house was behind her store. There was no light in it. Wade Sizemore stopped at her gate and set the lantern down on the ground. Ellery Vance got down off his mare, and he was going to say something, he did not know what, and Wade said, "Go on and knock. She will open it. She has done it before." And Vance said, "Come in with me." And Wade Sizemore said, "Rilla is up there." And that was all. He picked the lantern back up, and he turned around, and he walked back up the Coldwater Fork at 10 minutes past 4 in the morning, on foot, alone, with a light. Ellery Vance stood at a gate in Beaver Ford and watched that lantern go up the road and out of sight, and he never saw Wade Sizemore again for 8 years. He knocked on Verna Blount's door. She opened it in about 40 seconds, with a shawl over her nightclothes and a lamp in her hand, and she looked at him, and she did not say, "What is it?" And she did not say, "Do you know what hour it is?" She said, "How many nights?" He said, 13. And Verna Blount said, "Come in and sit down, and do not talk yet." She put him in a chair by a banked fire and built it up, and put a quilt over him and made coffee. And she did not ask him one single question for better than an hour, and when he finally started talking, he talked until the sun was well up. And when he was done, Verna Blount went and got her ledger. I promised you that ledger a long time ago, and here it is. It was the store ledger. Every purchase, every customer, every date, going back to 1869, when she had taken the store over from her first husband. It is an ordinary business record, and it is one of the most important documents in the history of this case, and the reason is a thing she had started doing years before and had never told anybody why. When a stranger came into her store and bought goods and said he was going down the Coldwater Fork, she wrote it in the margin. Just that. Coldwater. Sometimes with the date they said they would come back through. She had been keeping a list of them for 14 years. In a store ledger, in a settlement of 11 houses, in the poorest county in the state, because there was nothing else she could do, and she was not going to do nothing. She showed him the pages. She showed him where his own name was. On the 11th of October, with Coldwater written beside it in her hand, and he sat in her kitchen and looked at it and understood that she had written that word beside his name, expecting to never hear of him again, and had sold him crackers, and had said 3 things, and had watched him ride out. And she said, "You are the 4th." He said, "The 4th what?" And Verna Blount said, "The 4th that has come back to this door out of that hollow in 14 year. 2 of them would not talk about it. One of them talked about it and went queer and hung hisself in Rockcastle County in 79. You are the 4th, and you are the first one that has come back with paper." And Ellery Vance put on her kitchen table a peddler's daybook out of a wall, and a leaf torn from a register with his own name on it, and a memorandum book with 3 rules in pencil between a bay mare and 2 heifers. That is how this case exists at all. That is the whole reason you are hearing any of it. One man got out with 3 documents, and a storekeeper had been keeping a 4th one for 14 years, and everything else, everything the county ever proved, everything anybody ever wrote down, comes out of those 4 pieces of paper on a kitchen table in Beaver Ford, Kentucky, on the morning of the 24th of October, 1883. I said at the very beginning of this that 19 people are known to have gone into that hollow and not come out, and that 19 was the number the county could prove, and that the real number was higher. I have made you wait about 2 hours and 40 minutes for the 19, and I am going to give them to you now. And it will take a few minutes, and I would ask you to sit through it. The list was not assembled by any sheriff. It was assembled in 1891 by a newspaper man out of Louisville named Hollis Duff, who heard a version of this story second-hand, and did the only piece of real work anybody ever did on it. He got Verna Blount's store ledger. She was 64 by then, and still behind that counter, and she handed it over to him without being asked twice. He took the names she had written Coldwater beside. He cross-checked them against the county's letters of inquiry, which were the letters families wrote to sheriffs when a man did not come home, and which sat in boxes in 3 courthouses. And then, for 2 years, he wrote to the families. He got answers from 17 of them. His notes survive because his widow kept them. They were never published. He wrote 4 columns for a Louisville paper in 1893 about strange disappearances in the mountain counties, and the Coldwater material is not in any of them, and I do not know why, and I have a guess, and my guess is that an editor looked at it and asked him what exactly he was alleging and against whom, and he could not answer, because a man cannot print a hole in the ground in 1893. Here is what Hollis Duff had. Elias Renner, 39, a cooper of Garrard County, went down the Coldwater in the autumn of 1871 and was not heard from. His brother wrote to 2 sheriffs in 3 years. Elias Renner had buried a son of 9 years old in the March before he traveled. Jubal Hakes, 51, a horse trader of Madison County, 1872, widower of 11 years. His sister wrote that he had never got over it and had taken to traveling for its own sake, and that she had told him he ought to stay home. A man recorded in the register only as W. Prather Va 1872, and never identified, and never claimed by anybody, and one of the 2 Duff could get nothing on. Micajah Stone, 44, a tanner of Estill County, 1873. His daughter answered Duff's letter. Her mother had died the previous winter. She said her father had left the house at the end of it because he could not be in it. The young man from Rockcastle County, whom Silas Meek tried and failed to get a loan in 1873, and whose name in the register is T. Holland, and whose family Duff never traced, and who is the second of the 2 he could not close. Silas Meek wrote about him and did not write down his first name, and I have wanted that first name for a long time. Silas Meek himself. 44, peddler and preacher, of Owsley County, the 11th of February, 1874. His brother in Owsley answered Duff's letter in 1892 in a hand very like his. He said Silas had a sister who died at 19 in 1859, and that Silas had never married and had carried her likeness in his coat, and that he had gone strange in his last 2 years and had stopped coming home, and that the family had assumed drink, and that they had been ashamed of assuming it, and had gone on assuming it for 18 years, because there was nothing else to assume. Bethel Craig, 28, drover, of Jackson County, 1875. The only one on this list who had buried nobody, according to his mother, who answered at length and wanted very much to be told something, and to whom Hollis Duff wrote a careful letter that survives and that says almost nothing, because there was almost nothing he could honestly say. Lowell Vessels, 31, and his brother Amos Vessels, 26, of Whitley County, April 1877, traveling with Lowell's wife. Their mother had died in the January before they set out. It is the only pair on the list, and it is the only entry where 2 names carry 1 mark between them, and I do not know what that means, and I have thought about it a good deal. Alfred Doggett, 58, a surveyor, 1878, 2 daughters dead of scarlet fever. In 1876, Newton Rains, 33, tinner, 1879. Wife dead in childbed the year before, and the child with her. A man in the register as P. Oakes, 1880, of no county given. Jesse Sally, 61, a stock buyer, of Boyle County, 1880. His son answered. His mother, the son's mother, had died in 1878. The son wrote 1 line that Duff underlined twice, and that I would like read at my own funeral. He was not lost. He was looking. Ambrose Tandy, 29, 1881. Brother killed in a mill accident, 1880. Wilburn Frost, 47, 1881. Widower. Greenberry Mullins, 36, a male contractor, 1882, whose disappearance is the one that got Sheriff Bledsoe up that fork with 2 men and a dog in the first place. Because a male contractor is a man the government notices. Bledsoe found nothing. Mullins had buried a wife and an infant son in 1880. Reuben Hawker, 52, 1882, widower of 2 years. And 2 more in 1883, in the spring, both marked, neither ever claimed, both of them men whose names are in Verna Blount's ledger, with Coldwater beside them in her hand, and who do not appear in any other record on this earth. That is 19. 17 of the 19 were traced. Of those 17, 15 had buried somebody they loved within roughly 3 years of the day they rode down that fork. 1 had not Bethel Craig, 28, of Jackson County, and I will be honest and say that I do not know what happened to Bethel Craig, and neither did Duff, and neither did his mother. And 1, W. Prather of Virginia, is a name and nothing else. 15 out of 17. That is not a folk tale. That is a screening process with a documented success rate, run by a man asking a warm question over supper for 31 years, on a road with 40 travelers a year. And Hollis Duff, who had no idea what he was looking at, and who never once in his notes uses the word ghost, or any word like it, wrote at the bottom of the last page of his tally, in 1893, a sentence that is as close as anybody ever got in print. Whatever is on that fork, it is not taking men at random, and it is not taking them for their money, and I have come to think it is not taking them at all. I think they are going. Now, you are waiting for the part where the law comes up that hollow. It came, and I am going to tell you exactly what happened, and it is going to make you angry, and I want you to hold on to being angry, because at the end of it, I am going to ask you a question that only makes sense if you have been angry first. Ellery Vance rode to Manchester and swore out a statement in front of the sheriff of Clay County on the 26th of October, 1883, and was told, correctly, that the Coldwater Fork was in Tallow County and not Clay. He rode 2 more days and swore out a second statement in Tallow County in front of a sheriff named Bledsoe, who was the same Bledsoe who had gone up that fork with 2 men and a dog in 1881 and found nothing. Bledsoe took it seriously. I want that on the record. He was not a lazy man, and he was not in anybody's pocket, and he had been up there before on his own initiative on nothing but rumor, which is more than most sheriffs in that state would have done in that decade. He went up the Coldwater Fork on the 2nd of November, 1883, with 4 men, and he stayed 2 days, and here is what he found. He found a well-kept stand on a well-kept bottom belonging to 2 brothers named Sizemore. He found a barn in excellent repair with 8 stalls and a swept runway. He found the 3rd stall on the left, unbarred and standing open, empty, with a dirt floor, tamped and level, indistinguishable from the floor of any other stall in the barn. He found no hats in the corn crib. He found no register on the shelf by the door in the front room, and was told there had never been one. And there was a shelf, and the shelf had a clean rectangle in the dust on it, and a clean rectangle in the dust is not a crime. He found no woman named Rilla in the house, and was told by Ephraim Sizemore that no woman had lived there in years. He found no woman upstairs. The front room over the kitchen was empty, and had a bare rope bed in it, and a window with the shutter closed. He went down to the lower end of the bottom with 2 men, and found the sink, and found the iron ring around it, and asked about it, and was told by Ephraim Sizemore that his father had put iron around it to keep stock from going in, which is, and I want to be fair here, a completely reasonable thing to do with a hole that a cow can fall into, and which is very likely the answer that has protected that ring of iron from every curious person who has ever seen it. He put a man on a rope 40 feet down into the sink, The man came back up and said there was water and a passage, and it went beyond his light, and he was not going further on that rope, and no reasonable person has ever asked him to. He found no bones. He found no clothing, no buttons, no boots, no coins, no wagon parts, no graves, and no disturbed ground. Absalom Sizemore was not there. Bledsoe asked after him. Ephraim Sizemore said his brother had gone out to Missouri, and on the 4th of November, 1883, the sheriff of Tallow County went back down that road with 4 men and nothing at all, and wrote in his daybook a line that survives, and that I am going to read to you exactly as he wrote it, because I think it is the most honest sentence any official in this entire case ever committed to paper. Went up cold water on the Vance complaint. Nothing found. Do not believe the complainant is lying. Have no idea what to do about it. Absalom Sizemore did not go to Missouri. Absalom Sizemore does not appear in any record anywhere in the United States after the 23rd of October, 1883. Not a census, not a deed, not a tax list, not a grave. The 1890 census would settle it one way or the other, and the 1890 census burned in a fire in a government building in Washington in 1921, which is the reason a great many American stories have a hole in them at exactly the place where this one has a hole. But there is a Tallow County tax list for 1884, and the cold water bottom is on it, and the name against it is Ephraim. Then it will want somebody tonight. I have my own view about what happened in that yard after a lantern went out the lot gate in the wrong direction, and I am going to keep it to myself, and you can tell me yours. Ellery Vance went home to Bourbon County in November of 1883 and lived another 51 years, and the rest of this is what those 51 years looked like. And I am going to take my time with it, because the epilogue of this case is the part that I think about when I cannot sleep, and it is not the barn. He never married again. He kept working. He was a livestock buyer for another 26 years, and by all accounts, a very good one, and he made money, and he bought a small farm outside Paris, Kentucky, in 1896, and he raised nothing on it in particular, and lived on it alone. He changed his circuit. That is the first mark. From 1884 to the end of his working life, he did not buy one head of stock in Tallow County or in any county that touched it. He took a route that added, by his own reckoning, 210 miles a year and cost him money every single year for 26 years, and when a partner in Lexington asked him about it in the 90s, he said only that he did not care for the roads down there. He would not sleep in a room whose door did not have a bar on it. Not a lock, a bar. He carried a length of ash he had cut himself, planed and squared, 31 inches long, in his kit everywhere, for the rest of his life, and he put it across the door of every hotel room and boarding-house room and spare bed in a friend's house that he ever slept in, and he did not explain it, and after a few years people stopped asking. He carried a horseshoe in the left pocket of his coat. Every coat he owned for 51 years had a horseshoe in the left pocket, and he had it in his pocket when he died, and it was the same one, and it had been worn down to a bright polish on one face by 51 years of a man's hand going into a pocket to find out if it was still there. He counted. Every night of his life. Not aloud in later years, and not always, but a niece who lived with him for 2 years in the 19-teens said that if he woke in the night, which he did most nights, you would hear it from the next room, backward from 100, in a low voice, sometimes once, sometimes for an hour. She said she asked him about it exactly once, when she was 19, and that he told her the truth, all of it, in about 10 minutes, in the kitchen, and then said, "And now I have told you, and I would be obliged if you would not ask me again." And she never did. And here is the last mark, and it is the one that I cannot get past, and I have been carrying it around since I first read Coyle's account, and now I am going to hand it to you, and you can carry it. He never tapped a cup again. He had done it for 4 years, without knowing he did it. He had picked it up off a woman who tapped her thumbnail twice against a rim before she drank, and he had carried it out of her life into his own, and he had not known, and something in a hollow in Tallow County had watched him do it for 11 days and had knocked on a door with it at midnight. So he stopped. Deliberately. He told Coyle that it took him the better part of a year, and that he had to put his hand flat on the table sometimes to do it. Think about what that is. That is a man giving up the last unconscious piece of his wife that he had, on purpose, permanently, because something had shown him that it could be used against him. He did not lose it. He surrendered it. He looked at the last little living gesture of a woman dead 4 years, running in his own hands without his permission, and he put it down and walked away from it, because it was ammunition. That is what that hollow took off Thomas Ellery Vance. It did not get his life. It got that. Now, 1891. In the spring of 1891, Ellery Vance was 42 years old and was riding a circuit in Estill County. And at a ford on the Station Camp Creek, he came up on a man watering a team, and the man straightened up and looked at him, and it was Wade Sizemore. He was 30 years old. He had a full beard, and he was thin. He was hauling for a lumber outfit. They stood in that creek for the better part of an hour, and neither of them ever told anybody the whole of what was said. And what we have is what Vance told the minister Coyle 37 years later, which is 4 things. The first, Wade Sizemore got Rilla Vessels out of that house in the spring of 1884, 5 months after the night of the lantern. He did not say how. Vance did not ask. The second, he never carried one. Vance asked him directly, and Wade said, "No." And Vance said, "Not once?" And Wade said, "Not once, and I have got nothing else." The third, Ephraim Sizemore was still on that bottom in 1891, alone, and Wade had not spoken to him since '84. And Wade said, and this is a direct quote, and it is the only thing anybody ever recorded Wade Sizemore saying about his brother, he said, "He is not lonesome. There is somebody in that house with him, and I do not know which one of them it is." And the fourth thing, Ellery Vance asked him whether he ever thought about going back, and Wade Sizemore said, "Every day of my life, and I will tell you what stops me, and it is not being afraid. It is that I know exactly how it would go. I would walk down that fork, and I would get to the yard, and Absalom would come off that porch with his hands up like he does, and he would say, 'Well now,' and I would be 22-year-old again, and I would be glad. That is the thing about that place, Mr. Vance. It never once made me do nothing. It just waited for me to want to." Rilla Vessels appears in the record twice more. In 1892, she is listed in Owsley County, Kentucky, as the keeper of a boarding house in Boonville in a county business list under her own name, and she is buried in the church ground at Beaver Ford in Tallow County, under a stone that has her name on it, and the dates 1853 to 1929, cut properly at the expense of somebody. That matters more than it may sound like it does, because there is another stone in that same church ground, 40 feet away, with no date on it at all, over a woman who lived in a cabin with a puncheon floor, and cut ESTER and 1791 into the underside of her own mantle with a chisel, so that somebody, someday, would know she had been there. Rilla Vessels got a date. The Sizemore stand stood empty from about 1898. Ephraim Sizemore's name comes off the tax list in that year, and there is no record of what became of him, and I am not going to speculate. The house fell in some time before the First War. The barn stood a great deal longer, because it was extremely well built by a man who had a reason to build it well, and it came down in a wet March in 1926, in on itself all at once, which is how a frame barn goes when the sills finally let go. The county put a gravel road up the Coldwater Fork in 1931, and it goes past the bottom, and there is nothing to see from it but a flat piece of ground with a stone chimney standing in it and 11 apple trees in 2 rows. They were still there in the 1950s. A man from the State Agricultural Extension, who had no idea what he was looking at, made a note of them in a survey because they were an old variety he wanted to identify, and he wrote in his report that the stand was unusual in that the trees were of a remarkably uniform size and habit, and that he was unable to age them by the usual means. He wrote that in 1952, which was 100 years after Jephthah Sizemore built a barn over a hole, Thomas Ellery Vance died on the 9th of January, 1934, at his farm outside Paris, Kentucky, at 85 years old, of pneumonia, in the room he had slept in for 38 years. His grandniece was in the house. She was the same woman who at 19 had asked him once about the counting. She was 40 by then, and she had come to nurse him, and she had been there 9 days. She gave an account of the last night to the minister Coyle, who was still alive and still in that county, and Coyle wrote it down, and this is it. She said that at some point after midnight, on the 8th of January, she came out of her room because she heard him talking. She said the house was very cold. She said she remembered thinking that the stove had gone out, and that she was going to have to go down and see to it, and that she never did go down and see to it, and could not afterwards say why. She said the front door of that house was barred. She had barred it herself at 9 o'clock with the piece of ash, because he had asked her to every night for 9 nights, and she had stopped finding it strange. And she said that she stood in the hall outside his door, and there was somebody on the porch. She heard a woman's voice say, "Ellery." She said it was not loud. She said it was the volume you would use to somebody about 15 feet away. And she said that her great-uncle, who was 85 years old, and who had not been able to sit up by himself in 4 days, said out loud, in the dark, in a perfectly clear voice, 100, 99, 98. She went in. She said he had his eyes shut, and his left hand was in the pocket of the coat that was hanging on the bedpost beside him, which is a strange detail and which she did not understand at the time, and which we understand. She sat down on the edge of the bed and took his other hand, and she counted with him. She said they went down from 100 to 0 4 times, out loud, the 2 of them, in a cold bedroom in Bourbon County, Kentucky, in January of 1934, while something stood on the porch of that house and said his name in a voice that had been dead 55 years. She said that part way through the 4th pass it stopped saying his name, and that after that there was nothing on the porch, and she went down and the stove had not gone out at all, and the house came warm again. He lived another day and a half. He did not speak much, but she said that in the middle of the afternoon of the 9th of January, he was awake and clear and looking at the window, and he said one thing to her, and it is the last recorded sentence of Thomas Ellery Vance, and I have thought about it for a long time. He said, "It never did get her right, you know. Not once in 50 years. Not one time." And she said, "No, uncle." And he said, "Well, and that is all." She sat with him a while after that, and the winter light went off the window, and she thought about asking him what he meant, whether he meant it never got the voice right, or the humming, or the laugh, or the 2 little taps on the rim of a cup, and she did not ask him. And in 1935, to a country minister taking notes at a kitchen table, she said she had decided he meant none of those. She said she thought he meant that in 51 years, that thing had never once managed to be glad to see him, that it had said his name 10,000 times out of the dark, and had never once said it the way a woman says a man's name when he comes in out of the weather, that it had every piece of Cordelia Vance it had been able to steal off her husband, and it had used them well, and it had still never made the one thing that would have opened the door, because it had only ever learned people at the very end, frightened, in the dark, and there is no gladness anywhere in that, and it had none to copy. She said, "He was not telling me it was a bad likeness. He was telling me it was a likeness with the love left out, and I have come to believe that is the whole reason he never opened his door, that night nor any other, in 51 years. Among his effects there were 4 things kept together in an oilcloth packet in the drawer of a bedside table, and they were, in order, the daybook of Silas Meek, peddler, of Owsley County, begun June 1871, and ending mid-sentence on the 11th of February, 1874. A livestock buyer's memorandum book for the year 1883, with 3 rules written in pencil between a bay mare and 2 heifers, 1 leaf torn from a register, and a horseshoe worn bright on one face. There was also a page in his own hand, undated, written in old age, and it was folded around the register leaf. It says, "To whoever gets this after me." It is in Tallow County, Kentucky, on the Coldwater Fork, and it is still there because it does not die, and it does not move, and it does not need to. It cannot make anything. It can only take a copy. Everything I have told anybody about it comes down to that one thing, and if you remember nothing else, remember that one. So do not give it anything to copy. Do not say you're dead out loud on that ground. Count backward, out loud, from 100. And when you lose it, go back to the 100 and do not ever guess. And understand what it wants, because it is not your life. It does not want your life. It wants the little pieces of the people you have lost that you are carrying around without knowing you have got them. I gave up one of mine to keep it out. I would do it again. But I want it wrote down somewhere by somebody that I did not want to. Now, the leaf out of the register. That leaf still exists. It went from Vance to his grandniece, and from her to the Coyle family with the minister's papers, and it was photographed in 1954 when somebody at last thought to photograph it under a raking light, sideways on, which is how you read an erasure. The mark is there. The word kept is there, in that small, tight hand that did not change in 31 years. And under the word kept, rubbed out with a thumb or a crumb of bread, there is an earlier word, and in the 1954 photograph it is not certain, but it is readable, and it is 7 letters, and the last of them has a tail that goes below the line. The word is waiting. Here is what I think, and I have kept it back for 3 hours, and I am going to give it to you now, and then I am going to shut up and let you tell me if I am wrong. I think Absalom Sizemore marked that name on the 11th of October, 1883, the way he had marked 90 before it. And I think he wrote waiting, because the decision was not his to make alone that year, because his youngest brother was 22 years old and had not carried one, and it was overdue, and the argument in that family had been going on since the summer, and Absalom Sizemore, whatever else he was a man who kept a ledger honestly. The man was marked, and the family was not ready, waiting, and I think that at some point in the days after, somebody rubbed that word out and wrote kept over the top of it. And the hand that wrote kept on that leaf is the same hand that wrote it in 1854 and 1866 and 1874. Unchanged, identical, in a book kept in a house where 3 men lived, none of whom wrote like that, which means the thing in that hole did not wait to be brought a man. It read the book, and it corrected it. And that is the one and only time in 31 years and something like 90 names that the book was ever wrong. Because Thomas Ellery Vance rode out of the Coldwater Fork at 4 in the morning on the 24th of October, 1883, behind a boy with a lantern, counting out loud, and he lived another 51 years, and died in his own bed with his hand in his coat pocket. It wrote kept. And it did not get him, a thing that cannot make anything new, that had copied every voice and every habit and every last 10 minutes of 90 frightened people for 3 decades, made exactly one original statement in its entire existence. One word, in a margin, in a book, by a door. And it was a lie. So let me leave you with this, and then you can go and check your own door. Everybody in this story was warned. Every single one. Verna Blount gave her 3 and closed her mouth. Rilla Vessels gave her 3 at a stove before daylight. Oddie Redwine sat at the top of that hollow for 61 years, with a door that opened and gave her 3 to anybody who walked up. Silas Meek wrote his down and put them in a wall for a stranger. Nobody in this case ever died of not being told. So my question for you tonight is not whether you would have gone in the barn. Everybody says no to that one. My question is this. Somewhere in your own life, there is a voice you would open a door for. You know which one it is. You knew which one it was. About 90 seconds into this, and if that voice said your name tonight, the one that only they used, the one nobody else on this earth has ever called you from a place it could not possibly be, at an hour when the house is quiet, and it said, "I am cold out here," are you certain you would count? Tell me in the comments. And tell me the name, or do not tell me the name, but tell me that there is one. I want to know how many of us are sitting up tonight with the same door. If you have got a hollow of your own, a house, a stretch of road, a place your family does not go, put it below. I read every one of them, and more than one of these cases has come to me that way out of a comment at 3 in the morning from somebody who had never told anybody else. The collection is What the Hollows Keep. 10 cases, 9 hours, link in the description and pinned at the top of the comments. The next case is a lighthouse on the Georgian Bay, 1898. 3 keepers, 1 logbook, and a light that was seen burning for 11 nights after there was no one left alive on the island to burn it. Until then, keep your count and bar the door.